Part 7. 1. The Levins were already living for the third month in Moscow. The term was long past when, by the surest calculations of people who knew about such things, Kitty ought to have given birth, and yet she was still expecting, and there was no indication that the time was nearer now than 2 months ago. The doctor, the midwife, Dolly, her mother, and Levin especially, who could not think of the approaching event without horror, were beginning to feel impatient and anxious. Kitty alone was perfectly calm and happy. She was now clearly aware of a new feeling of love being born in her for the future child who, for her, was already partly present, and she delighted in attending to this feeling. It was no longer wholly a part of her now, but sometimes lived its own life independent of her. It often caused her pain, but at the same time made her want to laugh with a strange new joy. Everyone she loved was with her, and everyone was so kind to her, took such care of her. She saw so much of sheer pleasantness in all that was offered to her, that if she had not known and felt that it must soon end, she could not even have wished for a better or more pleasant life. The one thing that spoiled the charm of that life for her was that her husband was not the way she loved him and the way he used to be in the country. She loved his calm, gentle, and hospitable tone in the country. But in the city he was constantly anxious and wary, as if fearing someone might offend him and, above all, her. There, in the country, obviously knowing he was where he belonged, he did not hurry anywhere and was never unoccupied. Here in the city he was constantly in a hurry, as though he might miss something, and he had nothing to do. And she pitied him. To others, she knew, he did not look pitiful. On the contrary, when Kitty watched him in company, as one sometimes watches a person one loves, trying to see him as a stranger, to define the impression he makes on others, she saw, even with fear of her own jealousy, that he was not only not pitiful but very attractive in his decency, his rather old-fashioned, bashful politeness with women, his powerful figure, and his, as it seemed to her, particularly expressive face. But she saw him not from the outside but from inside. She saw that here he was not his real self. There was no other way she could define his condition. Sometimes she reproached him in her heart for not knowing how to live in the city. Sometimes she also admitted that it was truly difficult for him to arrange his life here in a satisfying way. Indeed, what was there for him to do? He did not like to play cards. He did not go to the club. To keep company with merry men like Oblonsky, she now knew what that meant. It meant drinking and going somewhere afterwards. She could not think without horror of where men went on such occasions. To go out in society. But for that she knew that one had to take pleasure in meeting young women, and she could not wish for that. To sit at home with her and her mother and sister. But however pleasant and enjoyable she found those ever identical conversations lines and nadines, as the old prince called these conversations between sisters, she knew they had to be boring for him. What was left for him to do? To go on writing his book? He did try to do that, and in the beginning went to the library to take notes and references, but, as he told her, the longer he did nothing, the less time he had left. And besides, he complained to her that he had talked too much about his book here, and as a result all his thoughts about it had become confused and he had lost interest in them. One advantage of the city life was that here in the city they never had any quarrels, either because city conditions were different, or because they had both become more prudent and sensible in that respect. In Moscow they had no quarrels because of jealousy, something they had been very much afraid of when they moved to the city. There even occurred an event that was very important for them both, namely, Kitty's meeting with Vronsky. The old Princess Marya Borisovna, Kitty's godmother, who had always loved her, wanted to see her without fail. Kitty, who in her condition never went anywhere, did go with her father to see the venerable old woman, and there met Vronsky. The only thing Kitty could reproach herself with in that meeting was that, when she recognized that once so familiar figure in his civilian clothes, her breath was taken away, the blood rushed to her heart, and bright color, she could feel it, came to her face. But that lasted only a few seconds. Before her father, who purposely addressed Vronsky in a loud voice, had finished what he was saying, she was fully prepared to look at him, to talk with him, if necessary, just as she talked with Princess Marya Borisovna, and, above all, so that everything to the very last intonation and smile could have been approved of by her husband, whose invisible presence she seemed to feel above her at that moment. She said a few words to him, even smiled calmly at his joke about the elections, which he called our parliaments. She had to smile to show that she understood the joke. But she immediately turned away to Princess Marya Borisovna and never once glanced at him until he got up to leave. Then she looked at him, but obviously only because it was impolite not to look at a man when he was bowing to you. She was grateful to her father for not saying anything about meeting Vronsky, but by his special tenderness after the visit, during their usual walk, she saw that he was pleased with her. She was pleased with herself. She had never expected that she would have the strength to hold down somewhere deep in her heart all memories of her former feeling for Vronsky, and not only to seem but to be quite indifferent and calm towards him. Levin flushed much more than she did when she told him she had met Vronsky at Princess Marya Borisovna's. It was very hard for her to tell him about it, and still harder for her to go on talking about the details of the meeting, since he did not ask but only looked frowning at her. "It's too bad you weren't there," she said. "That is, not that you weren't in the room. I wouldn't have been so natural with you there. Now I'm blushing much more, much more," she said, blushing to tears. "But that you couldn't have looked through a crack." Her truthful eyes told Levin that she was pleased with herself, and, despite her blushing, he calmed down at once and began asking questions, which was just what she wanted. When he had learned everything, even to the detail that she could not help flushing in the first second, but after that had felt as simple and easy as with anybody at all, Levin cheered up completely and said he was very glad of it and that now he would not behave as stupidly as he had at the elections, but would try at the very first meeting with Vronsky to be as friendly as possible. "It's so tormenting to think that there's a man who is almost an enemy, whom it's painful to meet," said Levin. "I'm very glad too. So please call on the Bulls," Kitty said to her husband, when he came to see her at 11 o'clock, before going out. "I know you're dining at the club. Papa signed you up." "And what are you doing in the morning?" "I'm just going to visit Katovisov," answered Levin. "Why so early?" "He promised to introduce me to Metrov. I'd like to discuss my work with him." "He's a well-known Petersburg scholar," said Levin. "Yes, wasn't it his article that you praised so much?" "Well, and then?" said Kitty. "I may also go to the court on my sister's business." "And to the concert?" she asked. "As if I'd go alone." "No, do go. They perform these new things. You were so interested." "I wouldn't miss it." "Well, in any case I'll call in at home before dinner," he said, looking at his watch. "Put on your frock coat, so that you can call on Countess Bohl on the way." "But is it absolutely necessary?" "Oh, absolutely." "He called on us." "Well, what will it cost you?" "You'll go, talk about the weather for 5 minutes, get up and leave." "Well, you won't believe it, but I'm so unaccustomed to these things that it makes me ashamed." "How is it?" "A stranger comes, sits down, stays for no reason, bothers them, upsets himself, and then leaves." Kitty laughed. "You paid calls when you were a bachelor, didn't you?" she said. "I did, but I was always ashamed, and now I'm so unaccustomed to it that, by God, I'd rather go 2 days without dinner than pay this call." "Such shame." "I keep thinking they'll be offended and say, 'Why come for no reason?'" "No, they won't be offended." "I can answer for that," said Kitty, looking into his face and laughing. She took his hand. "Well, goodbye. Please go." He was just about to kiss her hand and leave when she stopped him. "Kostya, you know, I only have 50 rubles left." "Well, then I'll go and get some from the bank." "How much?" he said, with an expression of displeasure familiar to her. "No, wait." She held on to his hand. "Let's talk. This bothers me. I don't think I spend on anything unnecessary, but the money just goes." "We're doing something wrong." "Not at all," he said, clearing his throat and looking at her from under his eyebrows. She knew that clearing of his throat. It was a sign that he was strongly displeased. Not with her, but with himself. He was indeed displeased, not that a lot of money had been spent, but that he was reminded of something which he, knowing that things were not right, had wished to forget. "I've told Sokolov to sell the wheat and take money in advance for the mill. In any case, we'll have money." "No, but I'm afraid it's generally too much." "Not at all, he repeated. "Well, goodbye, darling." "No, really, I'm sometimes so sorry I listened to Mama. It was so good in the country. And here I've worn you all out, and we're spending money." "Not at all. Not once since I've been married have I said it would have been better otherwise than it is." "Truly?" she said, looking into his eyes. He had said it without thinking, just to comfort her. But when he glanced at her and saw those dear, truthful eyes fixed questioningly on him, he repeated the same thing from the bottom of his heart. "I'm decidedly forgetting her," he thought. And he remembered what so soon awaited them. "Soon now? How do you feel?" he whispered, taking both her hands. "I've thought it so many times that now I don't think or know anything." "And you're not afraid?" She smiled scornfully. "Not a bit," she said. "So, if anything happens, I'm at Katowice." "No, nothing will happen. Don't even think of it. I'll go for a stroll on the boulevard with Papa. We'll stop at Dolly's. I'll be expecting you before dinner." "Ah, yes." "Do you know that Dolly's situation is becoming quite impossible? She's in debt all around, and she has no money. Yesterday I talked with Mama and Arseny, so she called Prince Lvov, her sister's husband, and we decided to set him and you on Steva. This is quite impossible. One can't talk to Papa about it. But if you and he—" "But what can we do?" asked Levin. "Still, while you're at Arseny's, talk to him. He'll tell you what we decided." "Well, with Arseny I'll agree to everything beforehand. I'll call on him. By the way, if I do go to the concert, I'll go with Natalie." "Well, goodbye." At the porch Kuzma, the old servant from his bachelor days, who was handling their town arrangements, stopped him. "Bo, this was the left shaft horse, brought from the country, has been reshod, but he still limps," he said. "What are your orders?" At the beginning of their life in Moscow, Levin had concerned himself with the horses he brought from the country. He had wanted to arrange that part as well and as cheaply as possible, but it turned out that keeping his own horses was more expensive than hiring, and they hired cabs anyway. "Send for the horse doctor, it may be a sore." "Well, and for Katerina Alexandrovna?" asked Kuzma. Levin was no longer struck now, as he had been at the beginning of their life in Moscow, that to go from Vozdvizhenka to Savtvruzheki it was necessary to hitch a pair of strong horses to a heavy carriage, take that carriage less than a quarter of a mile through snowy mush, and let it stand there for 4 hours, having paid 5 rubles for it. Now it seemed natural to him. "Tell the cabbie to bring a second pair for our carriage," he said. "Yes, sir." And having solved so simply and easily, thanks to town conditions, a difficulty which in the country would have called for so much personal effort and attention, Levin went out on the porch, hailed a cab, got into it and drove to Nikitskaya. On the way he no longer thought about money, but reflected on how he was going to make the acquaintance of a Petersburg scholar, a specialist in sociology, and talk to him about his book. Only during his very first days in Moscow had Levin been struck by those unproductive but inevitable expenses, so strange for a country dweller, that were demanded of him on all sides. Now he had grown used to them. What had happened to him in this respect was what they say happens with drunkards: the first glass is a steak, the second a snake, and from the third on it's all little birdies. When Levin changed the first 100-ruble note to buy liveries for his footman and hall porter, he calculated that these liveries, totally useless but inevitable and necessary, judging by the princess's and Kitty's astonishment at his hint that they might be dispensed with, would cost as much as 2 summer workers, meaning about 300 work days from Easter to Advent, each one a day of hard work from early morning till late in the evening, and that 100-ruble note still went down like a stake. But the next one, broken to buy provisions for a family dinner that had cost 28 rubles, though it had called up in Levin the recollection that 28 rubles meant about 72 bushels of oats which, with much sweating and groaning, had been mowed, bound, carded, threshed, winnowed, sifted and bagged. This next one all the same had gone a little more easily. And now the notes he broke had long ceased to call up such thoughts and flew off like little birdies. Whether the labor spent in acquiring money corresponded to the pleasure afforded by what was bought with it was a long-lost consideration. The economic consideration that there was a certain price below which a certain kind of grain could not be sold, was also forgotten. His rye, the price of which he had insisted on for such a long time, was sold at 50 kopecks less per measure than had been offered a month earlier. Even the consideration that with such expenses it would be impossible to get through the year without going into debt no longer had any significance. Only one thing was required: to have money in the bank, without asking where it came from, so as always to know how to pay for the next day's beef. And so far he had observed the consideration. He had always had money in the bank, but now the money in the bank had come to an end and he did not quite know where to get more. It was this that upset him for a moment when Kitty reminded him about money, but he had no time to think of it. He drove on, thinking about Katovisov and the impending meeting with Metrov. 3. During his stay in Moscow, Levin had again become close with his former university friend, Professor Katovisov, whom he had not seen since his marriage. He liked Katovisov for the clarity and simplicity of his worldview. Levin thought that the clarity of Katovisov's worldview came from the poverty of his nature, and Katovisov thought that the inconsistency of Levin's thought came from a lack of mental discipline. But Levin liked Katovisov's clarity, and Katovisov liked the abundance of Levin's undisciplined thoughts, and they loved to get together and argue. Levin read some parts of his writing to Katovisov, and he liked them. The day before, meeting Levin at a public lecture, Katovisov had told him that the famous Metrov, whose article Levin had liked so much, was in Moscow and was very interested in what Katovisov had told him about Levin's work, and that Metrov would be calling on him the next day at 11 o'clock and would be very glad to make his acquaintance. "You are decidedly improving, my friend, it's nice to see it," said Katovisov, meeting Levin in a small drawing room. "I heard the bell and thought, can it be he's on time? Well, how about these Montenegrins? Born fighters." 1. "What about them?" asked Levin. Katovisov told him the latest news in a few words, then, going into the study, introduced Levin to a short, stocky man of very pleasant appearance. This was Metrov. The conversation dwelt for a brief time on politics and on what view was taken of the latest events in the highest Petersburg spheres. Metrov told them the words, which he had from a reliable source, supposedly uttered on that occasion by the emperor and one of his ministers. Katovisov had heard, also reliably, that the emperor had said something quite different. Levin tried to conceive of circumstances in which both things could have been said, and the conversation on that subject ceased. "So he's almost finished a book on the natural conditions of the worker in relation to the land," said Katovisov. "I'm no expert, but what I liked about it, as a natural scientist, was that he doesn't consider mankind as something outside zoological laws, but, on the contrary, regards it as dependent on the environment and looks for the laws of development within that dependence." "That is very interesting," said Metrov. "I actually began writing a book on agriculture, but involuntarily, in concerning myself with the main tool of farming, the worker," Levin said, blushing. "I arrived at totally unexpected results." And carefully, as if testing the ground, Levin began to explain his view. He knew that Metrov had written an article against the commonly accepted political economic theory, but how far he could expect him to be sympathetic to his new views he did not know and could not guess from the scholar's calm and intelligent face. "But what do you see as the special properties of the Russian worker?" asked Metrov. "His zoological properties, so to speak, or the conditions in which he finds himself?" Levin saw that this question already implied a thought he disagreed with, but he continued to explain his own thought, which was that the Russian worker had a view of the land that differed completely from that of other peoples. And to prove this point he hastened to add that in his opinion this view of the Russian people came from their awareness of being called upon to populate the enormous unoccupied spaces of the East. "It is easy to be led into error by drawing conclusions about a people's general calling," Metrov said, interrupting Levin. "The worker's condition will always depend on his relation to the land and to capital." And not letting Levin finish his thought, Metrov began explaining to him the particularity of his own theory. What the particularity of his theory was Levin did not understand, because he did not bother to understand. He saw that Metrov, just like the others, despite his article in which he refuted the teaching of the economists, still regarded the position of the Russian worker only from the point of view of capital, wages and income. Though he had to admit that in the greater part of Russia, the eastern part, income was still zero, that for 9/10 of the Russian population of 80 million wages were only at subsistence level, and that capital did not exist otherwise than as the most primitive tools, he still regarded all workers from that point of view alone. Though he disagreed with economists on many points and had his own new theory about wages, which he explained to Levin. Levin listened reluctantly and began by objecting. He wanted to interrupt Metrov in order to tell him his thought, which in his opinion would make further explanations superfluous. But then, Convinced that they looked at the matter so differently that they would never understand each other, he stopped contradicting and merely listened. Despite the fact that he was no longer interested in what Metrov was saying, he nevertheless experienced a certain satisfaction in listening to him. It flattered his vanity that such a learned man was telling him his thoughts so eagerly, with such attention and confidence in his knowledge of the subject, sometimes referring to whole aspects of the matter by a single allusion. He ascribed it to his own merit, unaware that Metrov, having talked about it with everyone around him, was especially eager to talk on the subject with each new person, and generally talked eagerly with everyone about the subject, which interested him but was as yet unclear to him. "We are going to be late, though," said Katovisov, glancing at his watch, as soon as Metrov finished his explanation. "Yes, today there's a meeting of the Society of Amateurs to commemorate Svindich's 50th birthday, too," Katovisov replied to Levin's question. "Pyotr Ivanitch and I intend to go. I promised to speak about his works on zoology. Come with us, it's very interesting." "Yes, in fact it's time," said Metrov. "Come with us, and from there to my place, if you wish." "I'd like very much to hear your work." "No, really. It's still so unfinished. But I'll be glad to go to the meeting." "Say, my friend, have you heard? They've proposed a separate opinion," said Katovisov, who was putting on his tailcoat in the other room. And a conversation began on the university question. 3. The university question was a very important event in Moscow that winter. 3 old professors on the council had not accepted the opinion of the young ones. The young ones had proposed a separate opinion. That opinion, in the view of some, was terrible, and, in the view of others, was very simple and correct, and so the professors had split into 2 parties. Some, including Katovisov, saw falsity, denunciation and deceit in the opposing side; the others, brilliancy and disrespect for authority. Levin, though he did not belong to the university, had already heard and talked about this matter several times since coming to Moscow and had formed his own opinion about it. He took part in the conversation, which continued outside as the 3 men walked to the old university building. The meeting had already begun. Around the baize-covered table at which Katovisov and Metrov seated themselves, 6 men were sitting, and one of them, bending close to a manuscript, was reading something. Levin sat in one of the vacant chairs that stood around the table and in a whisper asked the student who was sitting there what was being read. The student looked Levin over with resentment and said, "The biography." Though Levin was not interested in the scientist's biography, he listened involuntarily and learned some interesting and new things about the life of the famous man. When the reader had finished, the chairman thanked him and read a poem by the poet meant for, sent to him for this jubilee, with a few words of gratitude to the author. Then Katovisov, in his loud, piercing voice, read his note on the learned works of the man being honored. When Katovisov finished, Levin looked at his watch, saw that it was already past 1 o'clock, and reflected that he would not have time to read his work to Metrov before the concert, and besides he no longer wanted to. During the reading he had also been thinking about their conversation. It was now clear to him that, while Metrov's thought might be important, his own thoughts were also important. These thoughts might be clarified and lead to something only if each of them worked separately on his chosen way, and nothing could come from communicating these thoughts to each other. And, having decided to decline Metrov's invitation, Levin went over to him at the end of the meeting. Metrov introduced Levin to the chairman, with whom he was discussing the political news. Metrov told the chairman the same thing he had told Levin, and Levin made the same observations he had already made that morning, but for diversity offered a new opinion that had just occurred to him. After that the talk on the university question started up again. Since Levin had already heard it all, he hastened to tell Metrov that he was sorry he could not accept his invitation, made his bows and went to see Lvov. For Lvov, who was married to Kitty's sister Natalie, had spent all his life in the capitals and abroad, where he had been educated and served as a diplomat. A year ago he had left the diplomatic service, not owing to unpleasantness, he never had any unpleasantness with anyone, and gone to serve in the palace administration in Moscow, in order to give the best education to his 2 boys. Despite the sharpest contrast in habits and views, and the fact that Lvov was older than Levin, they had become very close that winter and grown to love each other. Lvov was at home, and Levin went in without being announced. Lvov, wearing a belted house jacket and suede boots, was sitting in an armchair, a pince-nez with blue lenses on his nose, reading a book propped on a lectern, carefully holding out in a shapely hand a cigar half turned to ash. His handsome, fine, and still young face, to which his curly, shining silver hair lent a still more thoroughbred appearance, brightened with a smile when he saw Levin. "Excellent. And I was about to send to you. Well, how's Kitty? Sit here, it's more comfortable." He got up and moved a rocking chair over. "Have you read the latest circular letter in the Journal de St. Petersburg?" 5. "I find it splendid," he said with a slight French accent. Levin told him what he had heard from Kotov about the talk in Petersburg and, after discussing politics, told of his making the acquaintance of Metrov and going to the meeting. Lvov became very interested in that. "I envy you your entry into that interesting world of learning," he said. And, warming to the subject, he switched, as usual, to French, which suited him better. "True, I also have no time. My service and the children's education deprived me of that, and besides, I'm not ashamed to say that my education is much too deficient." "I don't think so," Levin said with a smile, touched as always by his low opinion of himself, by no means affected out of a desire to seem or even be modest, but perfectly sincere. "Ah, yes. I feel now how little learning I have. For my children's education I even have to refresh my memory a good deal and simply study. Because it's not enough to have teachers, there must also be a supervisor, just as in your farming you need workers and an overseer. See what I'm reading?" He pointed to Buslev's Grammar 6, on the lectern. "It's required of Misha, and it's so difficult. Explain this to me now." "He says here," Levin tried to explain to him, "that one cannot understand it but must simply learn it," but Lvov did not agree with him. "Yes, see how you laugh at it. On the contrary, you can't imagine how, by looking at you, I always learn what's in store for me. I mean children's education." "There certainly isn't anything to learn," said Lvov. "I only know," said Levin, "that I've never met better brought up children than yours and couldn't wish for better myself." Lvov obviously wanted to restrain himself and not show his joy, but he simply beamed all over. "As long as they're better than I am, that's all I wish for." "You don't know all the trouble yet," he began, "with boys who, like mine, were neglected in that life abroad. You'll catch up on it all. They're such capable children. Above all, moral education. That's what I learned from looking at your children." "Moral education, you say?" "It's impossible to imagine how hard it is. You've just prevailed on one side when something else crops up, and the struggle starts again. Without support from religion, remember, we talked about it, no father, using only his own resources, would be able to bring up a child." This conversation, which always interested Levin, was interrupted by the entrance of the beautiful Natalia Alexandrovna, already dressed to go out. "I didn't know you were here," she said, obviously not only not sorry but even glad to have interrupted this, for her, long familiar and boring conversation. "Well, how's Kitty?" "I'm dining with you today." "Now then, Arseny," she turned to her husband, "you will take the carriage." And a discussion began between husband and wife about how they were going to spend the day. Since the husband had to go and meet someone to do with his work, and the wife had to go to a concert and a public meeting of the Southeastern Committee, there was much to be decided and thought over. Levin, as one of the family, had to take part in the planning. It was decided that Levin would go with Natalie to the concert and the public meeting, and from there the carriage would be sent to the office for Arseny, and he would come to fetch her and take her to Kitty's. Or, if he was still busy, he would send the carriage and Levin would go with her. "The man spoils me," he said to his wife. "He assures me that our children are wonderful, when I know how much bad there's in them." "Arseny goes to extremes, as I always say," said the wife. "If you look for perfection, you'll never be content." "It's true what Papa says, that when we were being brought up there was one extreme, we were kept in the attic, while the parents lived on the first floor. Now it's the opposite, the parents go to the storeroom and the children to the first floor." "Parents mustn't have any life now, everything's given to the children." "Why not, if they like it?" Lvov said, smiling his handsome smile and touching her hand. "Anyone who didn't know you would think you were not a mother but a stepmother." "No, extremes aren't good in anything," Natalie said calmly, putting his paper knife in its proper place on the desk. "Well, come here now, you perfect children," he said to the handsome boys who came in and, after bowing to Levin, went over to their father, evidently wishing to ask him about something. Levin would have liked to talk with them, to hear what they said to their father, but Natalie turned to him, and just then Nabokov's colleague, Mikhail, in a court uniform, came into the room to fetch him, so that they could go together to meet someone, and now an endless conversation started about Herzegovina, Princess Korsunsky, the Duma, and the unexpected death of Madame Apraxin. Levin quite forgot about the errand he had been given. He remembered it only on his way to the front hall. "Ah, Kitty told me to discuss something about Oblonsky with you," he said, when Nabokov stopped on the stairs, seeing his wife and Levin out. "Yes, yes, Maman wants us, les beaux-frères, to fall upon him," he said, blushing and smiling. "But, after all, why me?" "Then I'll fall upon him," Natalie said, waiting in her white dog fur rotonde for the conversation to end. "Well, come along." 5. Two very interesting things were offered at the matinee concert. One was a fantasia, King Lear on the Heath, 7, the other a quartet dedicated to the memory of Bach. Both pieces were new and in the new spirit, and Levin wanted to form his own opinion of them. Having taken his sister-in-law to her seat, he installed himself by a column and resolved to listen as closely and conscientiously as possible. He tried not to get distracted and spoil his impression by looking at the arm-waving of the white-tied conductor, which is always such an unpleasant distraction of musical attention, or at the ladies in hats, who had carefully tied ribbons over their ears especially for the concert, or at all the faces, either unoccupied by anything or occupied by interests quite other than music. He tried to avoid meeting musical connoisseurs and talkers, and stood with lowered eyes, listening. But the longer he listened to the King Lear fantasia, the further he felt from any possibility of forming some definite opinion for himself. The musical expression of feeling was ceaselessly beginning, as if gathering itself up, but it fell apart at once into fragments of new beginnings of musical expressions and sometimes into extremely complex sounds, connected by nothing other than the mere whim of the composer. But these fragments of musical expressions, good ones on occasion, were unpleasant because they were totally unexpected and in no way prepared for. Gaiety, sadness, despair, tenderness and triumph appeared without justification, like a madman's feelings. And, just as with a madman, these feelings passed unexpectedly. All through the performance Levin felt like a deaf man watching people dance. He was in utter perplexity when the piece ended and felt great fatigue from such strained but in no way rewarded attention. Loud applause came from all sides. Everybody stood up, began walking, talking. Wishing to explain his perplexity by means of other people's impressions, Levin began to walk about, looking for connoisseurs, and was glad to see one well-known connoisseur talking with Bestov, whom he knew. "Amazing." Bestov's dense bass said. "Good afternoon, Konstantin Dmitrich." Particularly graphic and, so to speak, sculptural and rich in color is the place where you feel Cordelia approaching, where a woman, Das Ulig Weibliche, 8, enters the struggle with fate. "Don't you think?" "But what does Cordelia have to do with it?" Levin asked timidly, forgetting completely that the fantasia portrayed King Lear on the heath. "Cordelia comes in, here," said Bestov, tapping his fingers on the satiny playbill he was holding and handing it to Levin. Only then did Levin remember the title of the fantasia, and he hastened to read Shakespeare's verses in Russian translation, printed on the back of the bill. "You can't follow without it," said Bestov, addressing Levin, since his interlocutor had left and there was no one else for him to talk to. During the entr'acte an argument arose between Levin and Bestov, the eternal feminine, about the virtues and shortcomings of the Wagnerian trend in music. 9. Levin maintained that the mistake of Wagner and all his followers lay in their music wishing to cross over to the sphere of another art, just as poetry is mistaken when it describes facial features, something that should be done by painting. And he gave as an example of such a mistake a sculptor who decided to carve in marble the phantoms of poetic images emerging around the figure of a poet on a pedestal. 10. The sculptor gave these phantoms so little of the phantasmic that they're even holding on to the stairs, said Levin. He liked the phrase, but he did not remember whether he might not have used it before, and precisely with Bestov, and having said it, he became embarrassed. Bestov maintained that art is one and that it can reach its highest manifestations only by uniting all its forms. The second part of the concert Levin could not hear at all. Bestov stood next to him and spent almost the whole time talking to him, denouncing the piece for its superfluous, cloying, affected simplicity and comparing it with the pre-Raphaelites in painting. On the way out Levin met still more acquaintances, with whom he talked about politics, music and mutual acquaintances. Among others he met Count Bol, whom he had completely forgotten to visit. "Well, you can go now," Natalie said to him when he told her of it. "Maybe they won't receive you, and then you can come and fetch me at the meeting. I'll still be there." 6. "Perhaps they're not receiving," said Levin, entering the front hall of Countess Bol's house. "They are." "Please come in," said the porter, resolutely helping him out of his coat. "How annoying," thought Levin, sighing as he removed a glove and shaped his hat. "Well, why am I going, and what shall I talk about with them?" Passing through the first drawing room, Levin met Countess Bol in the doorway. With a preoccupied and stern face, she was ordering a servant to do something. Seeing Levin, she smiled and invited him into the next small drawing room, from which voices came. In this drawing room, in armchairs, sat the countess's 2 daughters and a Moscow colonel of Levin's acquaintance. Levin went up to them and, after the greetings, sat down by the sofa, holding his hat on his knee. "How is your wife's health? Were you at the concert?" "We couldn't go. Mama had to be at a pannicle." 11. "Yes, I heard. Such a sudden death," said Levin. The countess came in, sat on the sofa and also asked about his wife and the concert. Levin answered her and repeated the remark about the suddenness of Madame Apraxin's death. "Though she always had weak health. Did you go to the opera yesterday?" "Yes, I did. Luca was very good." 12. "Yes, very good," he said, and as he was totally indifferent to what they thought of him, he began to repeat what he had heard hundreds of times about the singer's special talent. Countess Bol pretended to listen. Then, when he had talked enough and fell silent, the colonel, silent up to then, began to speak. The colonel also talked about the opera and the lighting. Finally, having mentioned the planned Faldrani, 13, at Shirin's, the colonel started laughing, got up noisily and left. Levin also got up, but noticed from the countess's face that it was too early for him to leave. Another couple of minutes were called for. He sat down. But as he kept thinking how stupid it was, he could find nothing to talk about and remained silent. "You are not going to the public meeting? They say it's very interesting," the countess began. "No, I promised my Belser I'd come and fetch her," said Levin. Silence ensued. Mother and daughter exchanged glances once more. "Well, I suppose now is the time," thought Levin, and he got up. The ladies shook hands with him and asked him to convey milchoses to his wife. As he held his coat for him, the porter asked, "Where are you staying, if you please?" and wrote it down at once in a big, well-bound book. "Of course, it makes no difference to me, but still it's embarrassing. Crazy day. All their best." And terribly stupid, Levin reflected, comforting himself with the thought that everyone did it, and he drove to the public meeting of the committee, where he was to find his sister-in-law and take her home with him. There were many people, including almost the whole of society, at the public meeting of the committee. Levin managed to catch the summary, which, as everyone said, was very interesting. When the reading of the summary was over, society got together, and Levin met Sviazhsky, who insisted on inviting him that evening to the agricultural society, where a celebrated lecture would be read, and Stepan Arkadyevich, who was just back from the races, and many other acquaintances, and Levin talked more and listened to various opinions about the meeting, about the new music, and about a certain trial. But, probably owing to the flagging attention he was beginning to experience, when he talked about the trial he made a blunder, and later he recalled that blunder several times with vexation. Speaking of the impending sentencing of a foreigner who was on trial in Russia, and about how wrong it would be to sentence him to exile abroad, 14, Levin repeated what he had heard the day before from an acquaintance. "I think that exiling him abroad is the same as punishing a pike by throwing it into the water," Levin said. Only later did he remember that this thought, which he seemed to pass off as his own and had really heard from an acquaintance, came from one of Krylov's fables, 15, and his acquaintance had repeated it from a newspaper feuilleton. After taking his sister-in-law home with him, and finding Kitty happy and well, Levin went to the club. 7. Levin arrived at the club just in time. Guests and members were driving up as he arrived. Levin had not been to the club in a very long while, not since he had lived in Moscow and gone out in society after leaving the university. Though he remembered the club, the external details of its arrangement, he had completely forgotten the impression it used to make on him. But as soon as he drove into the wide, semicircular courtyard and stepped out of the cab onto the porch, where a porter in a sash soundlessly opened the door for him and bowed, as soon as he saw in the porter's lodge the galoshes and coats of the members who understood that it was less trouble to take off their galoshes downstairs than to go up in them, as soon as he heard the mysterious bell ringing to announce him, saw the statue on the landing as he went up the low-carpeted steps of the stairway, and saw in the doorway above a third familiar though aged porter in club livery, promptly but unhurriedly opening the door while looking the visitor over, he was enveloped by the long-past impression of the club, an impression of restfulness, contentment and propriety. "Your hat, please," the porter said to Levin, who had forgotten the club rule about leaving hats in the porter's lodge. "It's a long time since you were here. The prince signed you in yesterday." "Prince Stepan Arkadyevich has not arrived yet." The porter knew not only Levin but all his connections and family and at once mentioned people close to him. Going through the first big room with screens and another to the right where there was a fruit buffet, overtaking a slow-walking old man, Levin entered a dining room full of noisy people. He walked among almost completely occupied tables, looking the guests over. Here and there he saw the most diverse people, old and young, familiar or barely known to him. There was not a single angry or worried face. It seemed they had all left their anxieties and cares in the porter's lodge together with their hats and were now about to enjoy the material blessings of life at their leisure. Sviazhsky, and Strubytsky, and Nevdovsky, and the old prince, and Vronsky and Sergei Ivanovich were all there. "Ah, why so late?" said the prince, smiling and giving him his hand over his shoulder. "How's Kitty?" he added, straightening the napkin that he had tucked behind a waistcoat button. "Quite well, thanks. The three of them are dining at home." "Ah, Aline's, and Nadine's." "Well, we have no room here." "Go to that table and quickly take a seat," said the prince and, turning away, he carefully accepted a plate of burbot soup. "Levin, over here," a good-natured voice called from a bit further off. It was Trovtsin. He was sitting with a young military man, and next to them two chairs were tipped forward. Levin gladly joined them. He had always liked the good-natured carouser Trovtsin. His proposal to Kitty was connected with him, but now, after so many strained intellectual conversations, he found Trovtsin's good-natured air especially agreeable. "These are for you and Oblonsky. He'll be here any minute." The very straight-backed military man with merry, always laughing eyes was the Petersburger Gagin. Trovtsin introduced them. "Oblonsky's eternally late." "Ah, here he is." "Have you just arrived?" said Oblonsky, quickly coming up to them. "Greetings." "Had vodka?" "Well, come on." Levin got up and went with him to the big table set with all kinds of vodka and a great variety of hors d'oeuvres. It seemed that out of 24 kinds he might have chosen one to his taste, but Stepan Arkadyevich ordered something special and a liveried servant who was standing there immediately brought what he had ordered. They drank a glass each and went back to the table. Right then, still over the fish soup, Gagin was served champagne and had 4 glasses poured. Levin did not refuse the wine he was offered and ordered another bottle. He was hungry, and ate and drank with great pleasure, and with still greater pleasure took part in the gay and simple conversation of his companions. Gagin, lowering his voice, told a new Petersburg joke which, though indecent and stupid, was so funny that Levin burst out laughing loudly enough to make his neighbors turn to look at him. "It's the same kind as that I simply cannot bear." "Do you know that one?" asked Stepan Arkadyevich. "Ah, it's lovely." "Bring us another bottle," he said to the waiter and began telling the joke. "Compliments of Pyotr Ilyich Vinovsky," interrupted Stepan Arkadyevich's old footman, bringing over 2 thin glasses of still bubbling champagne and addressing Stepan Arkadyevich and Levin. Stepan Arkadyevich took a glass and, exchanging glances with a balding, red-haired man with a mustache at the other end of the table, nodded to him and smiled. "Who's that?" asked Levin. "You met him once at my house, remember? A nice fellow." Levin did as Stepan Arkadyevich had done and took his glass. Stepan Arkadyevich's joke was also very amusing. Levin told a joke of his own, which was enjoyed too. Then the conversation turned to horses, to the day's races and how dashingly Vronsky Satiny had won the first prize. Levin did not notice how the dinner went by. "Ah, here they are," Stepan Arkadyevich said when dinner was already over, turning across the back of his chair and holding out his hand to Vronsky, who was coming towards them with the tall colonel of the guards. Vronsky's face also shone with the general merry good humor of the club. He merrily leaned on Stepan Arkadyevich's shoulder, whispering something to him, and with the same merry smile gave his hand to Levin. "Very glad to see you," he said. "I looked for you back at the elections, but was told you had already left." "Yes, I left that same day." "We've just been talking about your horse." "Congratulations," said Levin. "That's very fast riding. I believe you also keep horses." "No, my father did. But I remember and know about them." "Where did you dine?" asked Stepan Arkadyevich. "We're at the second table, behind the columns." "He's been congratulated," said the tall colonel. "His second imperial prize. If only I had such luck at cards as he has with horses." "Well, no use wasting precious time. I'm off to the inferno," said the colonel, and he walked away from the table. "That's Yashvin," Vronsky answered Trovtsin and sat down in a place that had been vacated next to them. After drinking the glass he was offered, he ordered a bottle. Levin, influenced either by the impression of the club or by the wine he had drunk, got into a conversation with Vronsky about the best breeds of cattle and was very glad to feel no hostility towards the man. He even told him, among other things, that his wife had mentioned meeting him at Princess Marya Borisovna's. "Ah, Princess Marya Borisovna, she's lovely," said Stepan Arkadyevich, and he told a joke about Marya Borisovna that made everybody laugh. Vronsky, in particular, burst into such good-natured laughter that Levin felt completely reconciled with him. "So, all done," said Stepan Arkadyevich, getting up and smiling. "Let's go." 8. Leaving the table, feeling his arms swinging with a special tightness and ease as he went, Levin walked with Gagin through the high-ceilinged rooms towards the billiard room. Going through the main hall, he ran into his father-in-law. "Well, so? How do you like our temple of idleness?" the prince said, taking him under the arm. "Come, let's take a stroll." "I also wanted to have a look round." "It's interesting." "Yes, for you it's interesting. But my interest is different from yours." "You look at these little old men," he said, indicating a club member with a bent back and a hanging lower lip who walked towards and then past them, barely moving his feet in their soft boots, "and you think they were born such sloshers." "Why sloshers?" "See, you don't even know the word. It's our club term. You know, when you're rolling hard-boiled eggs, an egg that's been rolled a lot gets all cracked and turns into a slosher. It's the same with our kind. We keep coming and coming to the club and turn into sloshers." "Yes, you may laugh, but our kind have to watch out that we don't wind up with the sloshers." "You know Prince Chechensky?" asked the prince, and Levin could see from his look that he was going to tell some funny story. "No, I don't." "Well, really?" "I mean the famous Prince Chechensky." "Well, it makes no difference. He's always playing billiards. Some 3 years ago he was still a fine fellow and not one of the sloshers. He even called other men sloshers. Only one day he comes and our porter, you know Vasily. Well, that fat one. He's a great wit." So Prince Chechensky asks him, "Well, Vasily, who's here? Any sloshers?" And he says to him, "You're the third." "Yes, brother, so it goes." Talking and greeting the acquaintances they met, Levin and the prince passed through all the rooms, the main one, where card tables were already set up and habitual partners were playing for small stakes, the sitting room, where people were playing chess and Sergei Ivanovich sat talking with someone, the billiard room, where, around the sofa in the curve of the room, a merry company, which included Gagin, had gathered with champagne. They also looked into the inferno, where many gamblers crowded round a single table at which Yashvin was already sitting. Trying not to make any noise, they went into the dim reading room where, under shaded lamps, a young man with an angry face sat flipping through one magazine after another and a bald-headed general was immersed in reading. They also went into a room which the prince called the clever room. In this room 3 gentlemen were hotly discussing the latest political news. "If you please, Prince, we're ready," one of his partners said, finding him there, and the prince left. Levin sat and listened for a while, but, recalling all the conversations of that day, he suddenly felt terribly bored. He got up quickly and went to look for Oblonsky and Trovtsin. with whom he felt merry. Trovtsin was sitting with a tankard of drink on a high-backed sofa in the billiard room, and Stepan Arkadyevich was talking about something with Vronsky by the doorway in the far corner of the room. It's not that she's bored, it's the uncertainty, the undecidedness of the situation, Levin heard and was about to retreat hastily, but Stepan Arkadyevich called to him. "Levin," said Stepan Arkadyevich, and Levin noticed that his eyes, though not tearful, were moist, as always happened with him when he was drinking or very moved. This time it was both. "Levin, don't go," he said and held him tightly by the elbow, obviously not wishing him to leave for anything. "This is my truest, maybe even my best friend," he said to Vronsky. "You, too, are even nearer and dearer to me. And I want you to be and know that you should be close friends, because you're both good people." "Well, all that's left is for us to kiss," Vronsky said with good-natured humor, giving him his hand. Levin quickly took the proffered hand and pressed it firmly. "I'm very, very glad," he said. "Waiter, a bottle of champagne," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "I'm very glad, too," said Vronsky. But, despite Stepan Arkadyevich's wishes, and their own wishes, they had nothing to talk about and they both felt it. "You know, he's not acquainted with Anna," Stepan Arkadyevich said to Vronsky. "And I absolutely want to take him to her." "Let's go, Levin." "Really?" said Vronsky. "She'll be very glad." "I'd go home now," he added, "but I'm worried about Yashvin and want to stay till he's finished." "What, is it bad?" "He keeps losing and I'm the only one who can hold him back." "How about a little game of pyramids, Levin? Will you play?" "Well, splendid," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "Set it up for pyramids." He turned to the marker. "It's been ready for a long time," replied the marker, who had set the balls into a triangle long ago and was knocking the red one around to amuse himself. "Let's begin." After the game, Vronsky and Levin joined Gagin's table and Levin, at Stepan Arkadyevich's suggestion, began betting on aces. Vronsky first sat by the table, surrounded by acquaintances who were constantly coming up to him, then went to the Inferno to visit Yashvin. Levin experienced a pleasant rest from the mental fatigue of the morning. He was glad of the cessation of hostilities with Vronsky, and the feeling of peacefulness, propriety and contentment never left him. When the game was over, Stepan Arkadyevich took Levin under the arm. "Well, shall we go to Anna now, eh?" "She's at home. I've long been promising to bring you." "Where were you going to spend the evening?" "Nowhere in particular. I promised Sviazhsky I'd go to the Agricultural Society." "But all right, let's go," said Levin. "Excellent. Off we go." "Find out if my carriage has arrived." Stepan Arkadyevich turned to a footman. Levin went to the table, paid the 40 rubles he had lost betting on aces, paid his club expenses, known in some mysterious way to the little old footman who stood by the door, and, with a special swing of the arms, walked through all the rooms to the exit. 9. "The Oblonsky carriage!" shouted the porter in a gruff bass. The carriage pulled up and they got in. Only at the beginning, while the carriage was driving through the gates of the club, did Levin continue to feel the impression of the club's peace, contentment, and the unquestionable propriety of the surroundings. But as soon as the carriage drove out to the street and he felt it jolting over the uneven road, heard the angry shout of a driver going the other way, saw in the dim light the red signs over a pothouse and a shop, that impression was destroyed, and he began to reflect on his actions, asking himself if he was doing the right thing by going to Anna. What would Kitty say? But Stepan Arkadyevich did not let him ponder and, as if guessing his doubts, dispersed them. "I'm so glad," he said, "that you'll get to know her. You know, Dolly has long been wanting it. And Lvov has called on her and keeps dropping in." "Though she's my sister," Stepan Arkadyevich went on, "I can boldly say that she's a remarkable woman. You'll see. Her situation is very trying, especially now." "Why especially now?" "We're discussing a divorce with her husband. And he consents. But there's a difficulty here about her son, and the matter, which should have been concluded long ago, has been dragging on for 3 months. As soon as she gets the divorce, she'll marry Vronsky. It's so stupid, this old custom of marching in a circle, rejoice, O Isaiah, 16, which nobody believes in and which hinders people's happiness." Stepan Arkadyevich added, "Well, and then her situation will be as definite as mine, as yours." "What's the difficulty?" said Levin. "Ah, it's a long and boring story. It's also indefinite in this country. But the point is that, while waiting for the divorce, She's been living here in Moscow for 3 months, where everybody knows them both. She doesn't go anywhere, doesn't see any women except Dolly, because, you understand, she doesn't want them to come to her out of kindness. That fool, Princess Varvara, even she found it improper and left. And so, in that situation another woman wouldn't be able to find resources in herself. She, though, you'll see how she's arranged her life, how calm and dignified she is. To the left, into the lane, across from the church. Stepan Arkadyevich shouted, leaning out of the window of the carriage. "Pa, what heat!" he said, opening his already unbuttoned coat still more, though it was 12 degrees below zero. "But she has a daughter, mustn't she keep her busy?" said Levin. "You seem to picture every woman as a mere female, unikuvus," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "If she's busy, it must be with children." "No, she's bringing her up splendidly, it seems, but we don't hear about her." "She's busy, first of all, with writing." "I can already see you smiling ironically, but you shouldn't." "She's writing a book for children and doesn't tell anybody about it, but she read it to me, and I gave the manuscript to Vorkuev, you know, that publisher. A writer himself, it seems. He's a good judge, and he says it's a remarkable thing." "But you'll think she's a woman author?" "Not a bit of it. Before all she's a woman with heart, you'll see that. Now she has a little English girl and a whole family that she's occupied with." "What is it, some sort of philanthropy?" "See, you keep looking at once for something bad." "It's not philanthropy, a broody hen. It's heartfelt." "They had, that is, Vronsky had, an English trainer, a master of his trade, but a drunkard. He's drunk himself up completely, delirium tremens, and the family's abandoned." She saw them, helped them, got involved, and now the whole family's on her hands, and not patronizingly, not with money, but she herself is helping the boys with Russian in preparation for school, and she's taken the girl to live with her. You'll see her there. The carriage drove into the courtyard, and Stepan Arkadyevich loudly rang the bell at the entrance, where a sleigh was standing. And, without asking the servant who opened the door whether anyone was at home, Stepan Arkadyevich went into the front hall. Levin followed him, more and more doubtful whether what he was doing was good or bad. Looking in the mirror, Levin noticed that he was flushed, but he was sure that he was not drunk, and he walked up the carpeted stairway behind Stepan Arkadyevich. Upstairs Stepan Arkadyevich asked the footman, who bowed to him as a familiar of the house, who was with Anna, and received the answer that it was Mr. Vorkuev. "Where are they?" "In the study." Passing through a small dining room with dark paneled walls, Stepan Arkadyevich and Levin crossed a soft carpet to enter the semi-dark study, lit by one lamp under a big, dark shade. Another lamp, a reflector, burned on the wall, throwing its light onto a large, full-length portrait of a woman, to which Levin involuntarily turned his attention. This was the portrait of Anna painted in Italy by Mikhailov. While Stepan Arkadyevich went behind a trellis-work screen and the male voice that had been speaking fell silent, Levin gazed at the portrait, stepping out of its frame in the brilliant light, and could not tear himself away from it. He even forgot where he was and, not listening to what was said around him, gazed without taking his eyes from the astonishing portrait. It was not a painting but a lovely living woman with dark, curly hair, bare shoulders and arms, and a pensive half-smile on her lips, covered with tender down, looking at him triumphantly and tenderly with troubling eyes. Only, because she was not alive, she was more beautiful than a living woman can be. "I'm very glad," he suddenly heard a voice beside him, evidently addressing him. The voice of the same woman he was admiring in the portrait. Anna came to meet him from behind the trellis, and in the half-light of the study Levin saw the woman of the portrait in a dark dress of various shades of blue. Not in the same position, and not with the same expression, but at the same height of beauty that the artist had caught. She was less dazzling in reality, but in the living woman there was some new attractiveness that was not in the portrait. 10. She had risen to meet him, not concealing her joy at seeing him, and in the calmness with which she gave him her small and energetic hand, introduced him to Vorkuev and pointed to the pretty, red-haired girl who was sitting there over her work, referring to her as her ward. Levin saw the familiar and agreeable manners of a high-society woman, always calm and natural. "Very, very glad," she repeated, and on her lips these words for some reason acquired a special meaning for Levin. "I've long known of you and loved you, both for your friendship with Stiva and for your wife, I knew her for a very short time, but she left me with the impression of a lovely flower, precisely a flower, and now she'll soon be a mother." She spoke freely and unhurriedly, shifting her eyes now and then from Levin to her brother, and Levin felt that the impression he made was good, and he at once found it light, simple and pleasant to be with her, as if he had known her since childhood. "Ivan Petrovitch and I settled in Alexei's study," she said, in answer to Stepan Arkadyevitch's question whether he might smoke, precisely in order to smoke. And with a glance at Levin, instead of asking if he smoked, she moved a tortoise-shell cigar case towards her and took out a cigarette. "How are you feeling today?" her brother asked. "All right." "Nerves, as usual." "Remarkably well done, isn't it?" Stepan Arkadyevitch said, noticing that Levin kept glancing at the portrait. "I've never seen a better portrait." "And isn't it a remarkable likeness?" said Vorkuev. Levin glanced from the portrait to the original. A special glow lit up Anna's face the moment she felt his eyes on her. Levin blushed and to hide his embarrassment was about to ask if it was long since she had seen Darya Alexandrovna, but just then Anna spoke. "Ivan Petrovitch and I were just talking about Vashchenkov's latest pictures." "Have you seen them?" "Yes, I have," Levin replied. "But excuse me, I interrupted you, you were about to say?" Levin asked if it was long since she had seen Dolly. "She came yesterday. She's very angry with the school on account of Grisha. It seems the Latin teacher was unfair to him." "Yes, I've seen the paintings. I didn't much like them." Levin went back to the conversation she had begun. Now Levin spoke not at all with that workaday attitude towards things with which he had spoken that morning. Each word of conversation with her acquired a special meaning. It was pleasant to talk to her and still more pleasant to listen to her. Anna spoke not only naturally and intelligently, but intelligently and casually, without attaching any value to her own thoughts, yet giving great value to the thoughts of the one she was talking to. The conversation turned to the new trend in art, to the new Bible illustrations by a French artist. 17. Vorkuev accused the artist of realism pushed to the point of coarseness. Levin said that the French employed conventions in art as no one else did, and therefore they saw particular merit in the return to realism. They saw poetry in the fact that they were no longer lying. Never had anything intelligent that Levin had said given him so much pleasure as this. Anna's face lit up when she suddenly saw his point. She laughed. "I'm laughing," she said, as one laughs seeing a very faithful portrait. "What you've said perfectly characterizes French art now, painting and even literature." Zola, Daudet. 18. But perhaps it always happens that people first build their conceptions out of invented, conventionalized figures, but then, once all the combinations are finished, the invented figures become boring, and they begin to devise more natural and correct figures. "That's quite right," said Vorkuev. "So you were at the club?" She turned to her brother. Yes, what a woman," thought Levin, forgetting himself and gazing fixedly at her beautiful, mobile face, which now suddenly changed completely. Levin did not hear what she said as she leaned towards her brother, but he was struck by the change in her expression. So beautiful before in its calmness, her face suddenly showed a strange curiosity, wrath and pride. But that lasted only a moment. She narrowed her eyes as if remembering something. "Ah, yes, however, it's not interesting for anyone," she said, and turned to the English girl. "Please order tea in the drawing room." The girl got up and went out. "Well, did she pass her examination?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Splendidly. She's a very capable girl and with a sweet nature. You'll end by loving her more than your own." "That's a man talking. There is no more or less love. I love my daughter with one love and her with another." He was just telling Anna Arkadyevna, said Vorkuev, that if she spent at least 1/100th of the energy she puts into this English girl on the common cause of the education of Russian children, Anna Arkadyevna would be doing a great and useful thing. "Say what you like, I can't do it." Count Alexei Kirillich strongly encouraged me. In pronouncing the words Count Alexei Kirillich, she gave Levin a pleadingly timid look, and he involuntarily responded with a respectful and confirming look. Encouraged me to occupy myself with the village school. I went several times. They're very nice, but I couldn't get caught up in it. Energy, you say? Energy is based on love, and love can't be drawn from just anywhere. It can't be ordered. I love this English girl. I myself don't know why. And again she glanced at Levin. Her eyes, her smile, everything told him that she was addressing what she said to him, valuing his opinion and at the same time knowing beforehand that they understood each other. "I understand that perfectly," Levin replied. "One cannot put one's heart into a school or generally into institutions of that sort, and that is precisely why I think these philanthropic institutions always produce such meager results." She kept silent and then smiled. "Yes, yes," she agreed. "I never could." Jane Polikarase large to love a whole orphanage of nasty little girls. Seleni Majamariasai. There are so many women who have made themselves a position sociale that way. And the less so now, she said with a sad, trustful expression. "My heart isn't big enough. I've never succeeded in it." Ostensibly addressing her brother but obviously speaking only to Levin. "Now, when I so need some occupation, I cannot do it." And, frowning suddenly, Levin understood that she was frowning at herself for talking about herself. She changed the subject. "What I know about you," she said to Levin, "is that you're a bad citizen, and I've defended you the best I could." "How have you defended me?" "Depending on the attack." "But wouldn't you like some tea?" She rose and picked up a Morocco-bound book. "Give it to me, Anna Arkadyevna," said Vorkuev, pointing to the book. "It's well worth it." "Oh, no, it's all so unfinished." "I told him," Stepan Arkadyevich said to his sister, pointing to Levin. "You shouldn't have." "My writing is like those little carved baskets made in prisons that Liza Mertzalov used to sell me." She was in charge of prisons in the society. She turned to Levin. "And those unfortunates produce miracles of patience." And Levin saw another new feature in this woman whom he found so extraordinarily to his liking. Besides intelligence, grace, beauty, there was truthfulness in her. She did not want to conceal from him all the difficulty of her situation. Having said this, she sighed, and it was as if her face, acquiring a stern expression, suddenly turned to stone. With this expression she was still more beautiful than before, but this was a new look. It was outside the realm of the expressions, radiant with happiness and giving happiness, which the artist had caught in the portrait. Levin glanced once more at the portrait and then at her figure as she took her brother's arm and walked with him through the high doorway, and felt a tenderness and pity for her that surprised him. She asked Levin and Vorkuev to go to the drawing room and stayed behind to talk about something with her brother. About the divorce, about Vronsky, about what he's doing at the club. "About me," thought Levin. And he was so excited by the question of what she was talking about with Stepan Arkadyevich that he hardly listened to what Vorkuev was telling him about the merits of the children's novel Anna Arkadyevna had written. Over tea the same pleasant, meaningful conversation continued. Not only was there not a single moment when it was necessary to search for a subject of conversation but, on the contrary, there was a feeling of having no time to say what one wanted and of willingly restraining oneself in order to hear what the other was saying. And whatever was said, not only by her but by Vorkuev, by Stepan Arkadyevich, acquired a special significance, as it seemed to Levin, owing to her attention and observations. As he followed the interesting conversation, Levin admired her all the while, her beauty, her intelligence, her education, and with that her simplicity and deep feeling. He listened, talked, and all the while thought about her inner life, trying to guess her feelings. And he who had formerly judged her so severely, now, by some strange train of thought, justified her and at the same time pitied her, and feared that Vronsky did not fully understand her. After 10, when Stepan Arkadyevich got up to leave, Vorkuev had left earlier. It seemed to Levin as if he had just come. He, too, regretfully got up to leave. "Goodbye," she said, holding his hand and looking into his eyes with an appealing gaze. "I'm very glad Kalogle se romp." She let go of his hand and narrowed her eyes. "Tell your wife that I love her as before, and if she cannot forgive me my situation, I wish her never to forgive me. In order to forgive, one must have lived through what I have lived through, and may God spare her that." "Certainly, yes, I'll tell her," said Levin, blushing. 11. What an amazing, dear and pitiful woman, he thought, going out with Stepan Arkadyevich into the frosty air. "Well, so?" "I told you," Stepan Arkadyevich said to him, seeing that Levin was completely won over. "Yes," Levin replied pensively, "an extraordinary woman. Not just her intelligence, but her heart. I'm terribly sorry for her. God grant it will all be settled soon now." "Well, so don't go judging beforehand," said Stepan Arkadyevich, opening the carriage doors. "Goodbye. We're not going the same way." Never ceasing to think about Anna, about all those most simple conversations he had had with her, and at the same time remembering that the ice is broken. All the details of her facial expression, entering more and more into her situation and pitying her, Levin arrived at home. At home Kuzma told Levin that Katerina Alexandrovna was well, that her sisters had left her only recently, and handed him 2 letters. Levin read them right there in the front hall, so as not to be distracted later. One was from his steward, Sokolov. Sokolov wrote that it was impossible to sell the wheat, that the offer was only 5.5 rubles, and there was nowhere else to get money. The other letter was from his sister. She reproached him for still not having taken care of her business. "So we'll sell it for 5.50, since they won't pay more." Levin resolved the first question at once, with extraordinary ease, though it had seemed so difficult to him before. "It's amazing how all one's time is taken up here," he thought about the second letter. He felt guilty before his sister for still not having done what she had asked him to do. "Again today I didn't go to court, but today I really had no time." And, having decided that he would do it the next day without fail, he went to his wife. On his way, Levin quickly ran through the whole day in his memory. The day's events were all conversations he had listened to and taken part in. They had all been about subjects which he, had he been alone and in the country, would never have bothered with, but here they were very interesting. And all the conversations had been nice, only in 2 places had they not been so nice. One was what he had said about the pike, the other that there was something not right in the tender pity he felt for Anna. Levin found his wife sad and bored. The dinner of the 3 sisters had gone very cheerfully, but afterwards they had waited and waited for him. They had all become bored. The sisters had gone home, and she had been left alone. "Well, and what did you do?" she asked, looking into his eyes, which somehow had a peculiarly suspicious shine. But, so as not to hinder his telling her everything, she hid her attentiveness and listened with an approving smile as he told her how he had spent his evening. "Well, I was very glad that I met Vronsky. I felt very easy and simple with him. You see, now I shall try never to meet him again. But since that awkwardness is over," he said, and, recalling that, trying never to meet him again, he had at once gone to see Anna, he blushed. "We go around saying that the people drink. I don't know who drinks more, the people or our own class. The people at least drink on feast days, but Kitty was not interested in his thoughts about the people drinking. She had seen him blush and wished to know why. "Well, and where did you go after that?" Stiva was terribly insistent on going to see Anna Arkadyevna. Having said that, Levin blushed still more, and his doubts about whether he had done a good or a bad thing by going to see Anna were finally resolved. He now knew that he should not have done it. Kitty's eyes opened especially wide and flashed at the name of Anna, but with effort she concealed her agitation and deceived him. "Ah," was all she said. "You surely won't be angry that I went?" "Stiva asked me to, and Dolly also wanted it," Levin continued. "Oh, no," she said, but he saw the effort in her eyes, which boded him no good. "She's a very nice, a very, very pitiful and good woman," he said, telling her about Anna, her occupations, and what she had asked him to tell her. "Yes, to be sure, she's very pitiful," said Kitty, when he had finished. "Who was your letter from?" he told her and, believing in her calm tone, went to undress. Coming back, he found Kitty in the same armchair. When he went up to her, she looked at him and burst into tears. "What is it? What is it?" he asked, already knowing what. "You've fallen in love with that nasty woman. She's bewitched you. I saw it in your eyes." "Yes, yes." "What can come of it?" "You drank at the club, drank, gambled, and then went." "To whom?" "No, let's go away. Tomorrow I'm going away." It took Levin a long time to calm his wife down. When he finally did, it was only by confessing that the feeling of pity, along with the wine, had thrown him off guard and made him yield to Anna's cunning influence, and that he was going to avoid her. The one thing he confessed most sincerely of all was that, living so long in Moscow, just talking, eating and drinking, he had got befuddled. They talked till 3 o'clock in the morning. Only at 3 o'clock were they reconciled enough to be able to fall asleep. 12. After seeing her guests off, Anna began pacing up and down the room without sitting down, though for the whole evening, lately she had acted the same way towards all young men. She had unconsciously done everything she could to arouse a feeling of love for her in Levine, and though she knew that she had succeeded in it, as far as one could with regard to an honest, married man in one evening, and though she liked him very much, despite the sharp contrast, from a man's point of view, between Levin and Vronsky, as a woman she saw what they had in common, for which Kitty, too, had loved them both. As soon as he left the room, she stopped thinking about him. One and only one thought relentlessly pursued her in various forms. If I have such an effect on others, on this loving family man, why is he so cold to me? Or not really cold, he loves me, I know that. But something new separates us now. Why was he gone all evening? He sent word with Stiva that he could not leave Yashvin and had to watch over his gambling. Is Yashvin a child? But suppose it's true. He never tells lies. But there's something else in this truth. He's glad of an occasion to show me that he has other responsibilities. I know that. I agree with it. But why prove it to me? He wants to prove to me that his love for me shouldn't hinder his freedom. But I don't need proofs. I need love. He ought to have understood all the difficulty of my life here in Moscow. Do I live? I don't live. I wait for a denouement that keeps being postponed. Again there's no answer. And Steve says he can't go to Alexei Alexandrovich. And I can't write again. I can't do anything, start anything, change anything. I restrain myself, wait, invent amusements for myself, the Englishman's family, writing, reading, but it's all only a deception. The same morphine again. He ought to pity me, she said, feeling tears of self-pity come to her eyes. She heard Vronsky's impetuous ring and hastily wiped her tears, and not only wiped them but sat down by the lamp and opened the book, pretending to be calm. She had to show him that she was displeased that he had not come back as he had promised, only displeased, but in no way show him her grief and least of all her self-pity. She might have pity for herself, but not he for her. She did not want to fight. She reproached him for wanting to fight, but involuntarily she herself assumed a fighting position. Well, you weren't bored? He said, coming up to her, cheerful and animated. What a terrible passion, gambling. No, I wasn't bored. I learned long ago not to be bored. Stiva was here, and Levin. Yes, they wanted to come and see you. Well, how do you like Levin? He said, sitting beside her. Very much. They left not long ago. What did Yashvin do? He was winning, 17,000. I called him. He was just about to leave. But he went back and now he's losing again. What good was your staying then? She asked, suddenly raising her eyes to him. The expression on her face was cold and inimical. You told Stiva you were staying to take Yashvin away. And you left him there. The same expression of cold readiness for a fight also showed on his face. First of all, I didn't ask him to convey anything to you. Second, I never tell lies. And the main thing is that I wanted to stay and so I did, he said, frowning. Anna, why, he said, after a moment's silence, leaning towards her and opening his hand, hoping she would put her hand in it. She was glad of this invitation to tenderness. But some strange power of evil would not allow her to yield to her impulse, as if the conditions of the fight did not allow her to submit. Of course, you wanted to stay and so you did. You do whatever you like. But why do you tell that to me? Why? She said, becoming still angrier. Does anyone dispute your rights? No, you want to be right, so be right. His hand closed, he drew back, and his face assumed a still more stubborn expression than before. For you it's a matter of obstinacy, she said, looking intently at him and suddenly finding the name for that annoying expression on his face. Precisely of obstinacy. For you it's a question of whether you are victorious over me, but for me, again she felt pity for herself and she all but wept. If you knew what it is for me, when I feel, as I do now, that you look at me with hostility, yes, with hostility, if you knew what that means for me, if you knew how close I am to disaster in these moments, how afraid I am, afraid of myself. And she turned away, hiding her sobs. But what is this all about? He said, horrified at the expression of her despair and, leaning towards her again, he took her hand and kissed it. Why? Do I look for outside amusements? Don't I avoid other women's company? I should hope so, she said. Well, tell me, what must I do to set you at peace? I'm ready to do anything to make you happy, he said, moved by her despair. There's nothing I won't do to deliver you from such grief as now, Anna, he said. Never mind, she said. I myself don't know. Maybe it's the lonely life, nerves. Well, let's not speak of it. How was the race? You haven't told me, she asked, trying to hide her triumph at the victory, which after all was on her side. He asked for super and began telling her the details of the race, but in his tone, in his eyes, which grew colder and colder, she saw that he did not forgive her the victory, that the feeling of obstinacy she had fought against was there in him again. He was colder to her than before, as if he repented of having given in. And, recalling the words that had given her the victory "I am close to terrible disaster and afraid of myself", she realized that this was a dangerous weapon and that she could not use it a second time. She felt that alongside the love that bound them, there had settled between them an evil spirit of some sort of struggle, which she could not drive out of his heart and still less out of her own. 13. There are no conditions to which a person cannot grow accustomed, especially if he sees that everyone around him lives in the same way. Levin would not have believed 3 months earlier that he could fall peacefully asleep in circumstances such as he was in now, that, living an aimless, senseless life, a life also beyond his means, after drunkenness, he could not call what had happened at the club by any other name, an awkward friendliness shown to a man with whom his wife had once been in love, and a still more awkward visit to a woman who could be called nothing other than fallen, and having been attracted to that woman, thus upsetting his wife, that in such circumstances he could fall peacefully asleep. But under the influence of fatigue, a sleepless night and the wine he had drunk, he slept soundly and peacefully. At 5 o'clock he was awakened by the creak of an opening door. He sat up and looked around. Kitty was not in bed beside him, but there was a light moving behind the partition, and he heard her steps. What is it?" he asked, half awake. "Kitty." "What is it?" "Nothing," she said, coming from behind the partition with a candle in her hand. "Nothing." "I wasn't feeling well," she said, smiling with an especially sweet and meaningful smile. "What? It's starting?" "Is it starting?" he said fearfully. "We must send." And he hastily began to get dressed. "No, no," she said, smiling and holding him back. "It's probably nothing. I just felt slightly unwell. But it's over now." And, coming to the bed, she put out the candle, lay down and was quiet. Though he was suspicious of that quietness, as if she were holding her breath, and most of all of the expression of special tenderness and excitement with which she had said nothing to him, as she came from behind the partition, he was so sleepy that he dozed off at once. Only later did he remember the quietness of her breathing and understand what had been going on in her dear, sweet soul while she lay beside him, without stirring, awaiting the greatest event in a woman's life. At 7 o'clock he was awakened by the touch of her hand on his shoulder and a soft whisper. It was as if she were struggling between being sorry to awaken him and the wish to speak to him. "Kostya, don't be frightened. It's nothing. But I think we must send for Lizaveta Petrovna." The candle was burning again. She was sitting on the bed holding her knitting, which she had busied herself with during the last few days. "Please don't be frightened. It's nothing." "I'm not afraid at all," she said, seeing his frightened face, and she pressed his hand to her breast, then to her lips. He hastily jumped out of bed, unaware of himself and not taking his eyes off her, put on his dressing gown, and stood there, still looking at her. He had to go, but he could not tear himself from her eyes. Not that he did not love her face and know her expression, her gaze, but he had never seen her like that. When he remembered how upset she had been yesterday, how vile and horrible he appeared to himself before her as she was now. Her flushed face, surrounded by soft hair coming from under her nightcap, shone with joy and resolution. However little unnaturalness and conventionality there was in Kitty's character generally, Levin was still struck by what was uncovered to him now, when all the veils were suddenly taken away and the very core of her soul shone in her eyes. And in that simplicity and nakedness she, the very one he loved, was still more visible. She looked at him and smiled, but suddenly her eyebrows twitched. She raised her head and, quickly going up to him, took his hand and pressed all of herself to him, so that he could feel her hot breath on him. She was suffering and seemed to be complaining to him of her suffering. And by habit, in the first moment, he thought that he was to blame. But there was a tenderness in her eyes that said she not only did not reproach him but loved him for these sufferings. "If it's not I, then who is to blame for this?" he thought involuntarily, looking for the one to blame in order to punish him, but there was no one to blame. No one was to blame, but then was it not possible simply to help her, to free her. But that, too, was impossible, was not needed. She suffered, complained and yet triumphed in these sufferings, and rejoiced in them, and loved them. He saw that something beautiful was being accomplished in her soul, but what, he could not understand. It was above his understanding. "I've sent for Mama." "And you go quickly for Lizaveta Petrovna, Kostya." "Never mind, it's over." She moved away from him and rang the bell. "Well, go now. Pasha's coming." "I'm all right." And with surprise Levin saw her take up the knitting she had brought during the night and begin to knit again. As he was going out of one door, he heard the maid come in the other. He stopped in the doorway and heard Kitty give detailed orders to the maid and help her to start moving the bed. He got dressed and, while the horse was being harnessed, since there were no cabs yet, again ran to the bedroom, not on tiptoe but on wings, as it seemed to him. Two maids with a preoccupied air were moving something in the bedroom. Kitty was walking and knitting, quickly throwing over the stitches as she gave orders. "I'm going for the doctor now. They've sent for Lizaveta Petrovna, but I'll call there, too. Do we need anything else?" "Ah, yes. Shall I send for Dolly?" She looked at him, obviously not listening to what he was saying. "Yes, yes." "Go, go," she said quickly, frowning and waving her hand at him. He was going into the drawing room when he suddenly heard a pitiful, instantly fading moan from the bedroom. He stopped and for a long time could not understand. "Yes, it's she," he said to himself and, clutching his head, he ran down the stairs. "Lord, have mercy, forgive us, help us." He repeated words that somehow suddenly came to his lips. And he, an unbeliever, repeated these words not just with his lips. Now, in that moment, he knew that neither all his doubts, nor the impossibility he knew in himself of believing by means of reason, hindered him in the least from addressing God. It all blew off his soul like dust. To whom was he to turn if not to him in whose hands he felt himself, his soul and his love to be? The horse was still not ready, but feeling in himself a special straining of physical powers and of attention to what he was going to do, so as not to lose a single minute, he started on foot without waiting for the horse, telling Kuzma to catch up with him. At the corner he met a speeding night cab. In the small sleigh sat Lizaveta Petrovna in a velvet cloak, with a kerchief wrapped round her head. Thank God," he said, recognizing with delight her small blonde face, which now wore an especially serious, even stern, expression. He ran back alongside her without telling the driver to stop. "So it's been about 2 hours, not more?" she asked. "You'll find Pyotr Dmitrich, only don't rush him. And get some opium at the apothecary's." "So you think it may be all right?" "Lord have mercy and help us," said Levin, seeing his horse come through the gate. Jumping into the sleigh beside Kuzma, he told him to go to the doctor's. 14. The doctor was not up yet, and the footman said he went to bed late and was not to be awakened, but would be getting up soon. The footman was cleaning the lamp glasses and seemed to be very absorbed in it. His attention to the glasses and indifference to what was happening at home at first astounded Levin, but, thinking better, he realized at once that no one knew or was obliged to know his feelings, and that his actions had to be all the more calm, thoughtful and resolute, so as to break through this wall of indifference and achieve his goal. "Don't rush and don't overlook anything," Levin said to himself, feeling a greater and greater upsurge of physical strength and attentiveness to all he was going to do. Having learned that the doctor was not up yet, Levin, out of all the plans he could think of, settled on the following. Kuzma would go with a note to another doctor, he himself would go to the pharmacy to get the opium, and if, when he came back, the doctor was still not up, he would bribe the footman or, if he refused, awaken the doctor by force at all costs. At the apothecary's a lean dispenser, with the same indifference with which the footman had cleaned the glasses, was compressing powders into pills for a waiting coachman and refused him the opium. Trying not to hurry or become angry, Levin began persuading him, giving him the names of the doctor and the midwife and explaining what the opium was needed for. The dispenser asked in German for advice about providing the medicine and, getting approval from behind a partition, took out a bottle and a funnel, slowly poured from the big bottle into a small one, stuck on a label, sealed it, despite Levin's requests that he not do so, and also wanted to wrap it up. That was more than Levin could bear. He resolutely tore the bottle from his hands and ran out through the big glass door. The doctor was not up yet, and the footman, now occupied with spreading a carpet, refused to wake him. Levin unhurriedly took out a 10-ruble note and, articulating the words slowly, yet wasting no time, handed him the note and explained that Pyotr Dmitrich, how great and significant the previously unimportant Pyotr Dmitrich now seemed to Levin, had promised to come at any time, that he would certainly not be angry, and therefore he must wake him at once. The footman consented and went upstairs, inviting Levin into the consulting room. Through the door Levin could hear the doctor coughing, walking about, washing and saying something. Some 3 minutes passed. To Levin they seemed more like an hour. He could not wait any longer. Pyotr Dmitrich, he said in a pleading voice through the open door, for God's sake, forgive me. Receive me as you are. It's already been more than 2 hours. Coming, replied the voice, and Levin was amazed to hear the doctor chuckle as he said it. For one little moment. Coming. 2 more minutes went by while the doctor put his boots on, and another 2 minutes while he put his clothes on and combed his hair. Pyotr Dmitrich, Levin began again in a pitiful voice, but just then the doctor came out, dressed and combed. These people have no shame, thought Levin, combing his hair while we perish. Good morning, the doctor said to him, holding out his hand, as if teasing him with his calmness. Don't be in a hurry. Well, sir? Trying to be as thorough as possible, Levin began to give all the unnecessary details of his wife's condition, constantly interrupting his story with requests that the doctor come with him at once. Don't you be in a hurry. You see, I'm probably not even needed, but I promised and so I'll come if you like. But there's no hurry. Sit down, please. Would you care for some coffee? Levin looked at him, asking with his eyes whether he was laughing at him. But the doctor never even thought of laughing. I know, sir, I know, the doctor said, smiling. I'm a family man myself, but in these moments we husbands are the most pathetic people. I have a patient whose husband always runs out to the stable on such occasions. But what do you think, Pyotr Dmitrich? Do you think it may end well? All the evidence points to a good outcome. Then you'll come now? Said Levin, looking spitefully at the servant who brought the coffee. In about an hour. No, for God's sake. Well, let me have some coffee first. The doctor began on his coffee. The two were silent. The Turks are certainly taking a beating, though. Did you read yesterday's dispatch? The doctor said, chewing his roll. No, I can't stand it, said Levin, jumping up. So you'll be there in a quarter of an hour? In half an hour. Word of honor? When Levin returned home, he drove up at the same time as the princess, and together they went to the bedroom door. There were tears in the princess's eyes and her hands were trembling. Seeing Levin, she embraced him and wept. What news, darling Lizaveta Petrovna? She said, seizing the hand of Lizaveta Petrovna, who came out to meet them with a radiant and preoccupied face. It's going well, she said. Persuade her to lie down. It will be easier. From the moment he had woken up and realized what was happening, Levin had prepared himself to endure what awaited him, without reflecting, without anticipating, firmly locking up all his thoughts and feelings, without upsetting his wife, but, on the contrary, calming and supporting her, not allowing himself even to think of what would happen, of how it would end. Going by his inquiries about how long it usually lasts, Levin had prepared himself in his imagination to endure and keep his heart under control for some 5 hours, and that seemed possible to him. But when he came back from the doctor's and again saw her sufferings, he began to repeat more and more often, Lord, forgive us and help us, to sigh and lift up his eyes, and he was afraid that he would not hold out, that he would burst into tears or run away. So tormenting it was for him. And only 1 hour had passed. But after that hour another hour passed, 2, 3, all 5 hours that he had set for himself as the furthest limit of his endurance, and the situation was still the same, and he still endured, because there was nothing else he could do, thinking every moment that he had reached the final limit of endurance and that his heart was about to break from compassion. But more minutes passed, hours and more hours, and his feelings of suffering and dread grew and became more intense. All the ordinary circumstances of life, without which nothing could be imagined, ceased to exist for Levin. He lost awareness of time. Sometimes minutes, those minutes when she called him to her and he held her sweaty hand, which now pressed his with extraordinary force, now pushed him away, seemed like hours to him, and sometimes hours seemed like minutes. He was surprised when Lizaveta Petrovna asked him to light a candle behind the screen, and he discovered that it was already 5 o'clock in the evening. If he had been told that it was now only 10 o'clock in the morning, he would have been no more surprised. Where he had been during the time he did not know, any more than he knew when things had happened. He saw her burning face, bewildered and suffering, then smiling and comforting him. He saw the princess, red, tense, her gray hair uncurled, biting her lips in an effort to hide her tears. He saw Dolly, and the doctor smoking fat cigarettes, and Lizaveta Petrovna with her firm, resolute and comforting face, and the old prince pacing the reception room with a frown. But how they all came and went, and where they were, he did not know. The princess was now with the doctor in the bedroom, now in the study where a laid table had appeared. Then it was not she but Dolly. Then Levin remembered being sent somewhere. Once he was sent to move a table and a sofa. He did it zealously, thinking it was for her, and only later learned that he had prepared his own bed. Then he was sent to the study to ask the doctor something. The doctor answered and then began talking about the disorders in the Duma. Then he was sent to the princess's bedroom to fetch an icon in a gilded silver casing, and with the princess's old maid he climbed up to take it from the top of a cabinet and broke the icon lamp. The princess's maid comforted him about his wife in the icon lamp, and he brought the icon and put it by Kitty's head, carefully tucking it behind the pillow. But where, when, and why all this happened, he did not know. Nor did he know why the princess took him by the hand and, gazing pitifully at him, asked him to calm down, why Dolly kept telling him to eat something and leading him out of the room, and even the doctor looked at him gravely and commiseratingly and offered him some drops. He knew and felt only that what was being accomplished was similar to what had been accomplished a year ago in a hotel in a provincial capital, on the deathbed of his brother Nikolai. But that had been grief and this was joy. But that grief and this joy were equally outside all ordinary circumstances of life, were like holes in this ordinary life, through which something higher showed. And just as painful, as tormenting in its coming, was what was now being accomplished, and just as inconceivably, in contemplating this higher thing, the soul rose to such heights as it had never known before, where reason was no longer able to overtake it. Lord, forgive us and help us, he constantly repeated to himself, feeling, in spite of so long and seemingly so complete an estrangement, that he was turning to God just as trustfully and simply as in his childhood and early youth. All this time he had two separate moods. One away from her presence, with the doctor, who smoked one fat cigarette after another, putting them out against the edge of the full ashtray, with Dolly and the prince, where they talked of dinner, politics, Marya Petrovna's illness, where Levin would suddenly forget what was happening for a moment and feel as if he were waking up, and the other in her presence, by her head, where his heart was ready to burst from compassion but would not burst, and he prayed to God without ceasing. And each time he was brought out of momentary oblivion by a cry reaching him from the bedroom, he fell into the same strange delusion that had come over him at the first moment. Each time, hearing a cry, he jumped up and ran to vindicate himself, remembering on the way that he was not to blame, and then he longed to protect and help her. But, looking at her, he again saw that it was impossible to help, and he was horrified and said, Lord, forgive us and help us. And the more time that passed, the stronger the two moods became, the calmer he became, even forgetting her completely, away from her presence, and the more tormenting became her sufferings and his own helplessness before them. He would jump up, wishing to run away somewhere, and run to her. Sometimes, when she called him again and again, he blamed her. But seeing her obedient, smiling face and hearing the words, I've worn you out, he blamed God. Then, remembering God, he at once asked him to forgive and have mercy. 15. He did not know whether it was late or early. The candles were all burning low. Dolly had just come to the study to suggest that the doctor lie down. Levin sat there listening to the doctor tell about a quack mesmerist and watching the ashes of his cigarette. It was a period of rest and he had become oblivious. He had entirely forgotten what was going on now. He listened to the doctor's story and understood it. Suddenly there was a scream unlike anything he had ever heard. The scream was so terrible that Levin did not even jump up, but, holding his breath, gave the doctor a frightened, questioning look. The doctor cocked his head to one side, listened, and smiled approvingly. It was also extraordinary that nothing any longer astonished Levin. Probably it should be so, he thought, and went on sitting. Whose scream was it? He jumped up, ran on tiptoe to the bedroom, went round Lizaveta Petrovna and the princess, and stood in his place at the head of the bed. The screaming had ceased, but something was changed now. What? He did not see or understand, nor did he want to see and understand. But he saw it from Lizaveta Petrovna's face. Her face was stern and pale and still just as resolute, though her jaws twitched a little and her eyes were fixed on Kitty. Kitty's burning, tormented face, with a strand of hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, was turned to him and sought his eyes. Her raised hands asked for his. Seizing his hands in her sweaty hands, she started pressing them to her face. "Don't leave, don't leave. I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid." She spoke quickly. "Mama, take my earrings. They bother me." "You're not afraid?" "Soon, Lizaveta Petrovna, soon." She spoke quickly, and tried to smile. But suddenly her face became distorted, and she pushed him away from her. "No, it's terrible. I'll die, I'll die." "Go, go," she cried, and again came that scream that was unlike anything in the world. Levin clutched his head and ran out of the room. Never mind, it's all right," Dolly said after him. But whatever they said, he knew that all was now lost. Leaning his head against the doorpost, he stood in the next room and heard a shrieking and howling such as he had never heard before, and he knew that these cries were coming from what had once been Kitty. He had long ceased wishing for the child. He now hated this child. He did not even wish for her to live now, he only wished for an end to this terrible suffering. "Doctor, what is it? What is it?" "My God," he said, seizing the doctor by the arm as he came in. "It's nearly over," said the doctor. And the doctor's face was so serious as he said it that Levin understood this "nearly over" to mean she was dying. Forgetting himself, he ran into the bedroom. The first thing he saw was Lizaveta Petrovna's face. It was still more stern and frowning. Kitty's face was not there. In place of it, where it used to be, was something dreadful both in its strained look and in the sound that came from it. He leaned his head against the wooden bedstead, feeling that his heart was bursting. The terrible screaming would not stop. It became still more terrible, and then, as if reaching the final limit of the terrible, it suddenly stopped. Levin did not believe his ears, but there could be no doubt. The screaming stopped, and there was a quiet stirring, a rustle and quick breathing, and her faltering, alive, gentle and happy voice softly said, "It's over." He raised his head, her arms resting strengthlessly on the blanket, remarkably beautiful and quiet. She silently looked at him and tried but was unable to smile. And suddenly from that mysterious and terrible, unearthly world in which he had lived for those 22 hours, Levin felt himself instantly transported into the former, ordinary world, but radiant now with such a new light of happiness that he could not bear it. The taut strings all snapped. Sobs and tears of joy, which he could never have foreseen, rose in him with such force, heaving his whole body, that for a long time they prevented him from the speaking. Falling on his knees beside the bed, he held his wife's hand to his lips, kissing it, and the hand responded to his kisses with a weak movement of the fingers. And meanwhile, there at the foot of the bed, in the deft hands of Lizaveta Petrovna, like a small flame over a lamp, wavered the life of a human being who had never existed before and who, with the same right, with the same importance for itself, would live and produce its own kind. Alive. And it's a boy. "Don't worry." Levin heard the voice of Lizaveta Petrovna, who was slapping the baby's back with a trembling hand. "Mama, is it true?" said Kitty's voice. She was answered only by the princess's sobs. And amidst the silence, as the indubitable reply to the mother's question, a voice was heard, quite different from all the subdued voices speaking in the room. It was the bold, brazen cry, not intent on understanding anything, of a new human being who had appeared incomprehensibly from somewhere. Earlier, if Levin had been told that Kitty had died and that he had died with her, and that they had angels for children, and that God was there before them, none of it would have surprised him. But now, having come back to the world of reality, he made great mental efforts to understand that she was alive and well, and that the being shrieking so desperately was his son. Kitty was alive, her sufferings were over, and he was inexpressibly happy. That he understood, and in that he was fully happy. But the baby? Whence, why, and who was he? He simply could not understand, could not get accustomed to this thought. It seemed to him something superfluous, an overabundance, and for a long time he could not get used to it. 16. Towards 10 o'clock the old prince, Sergei Ivanovich and Stepan Arkadyevich were sitting at Levin's and, after talking about the new mother, had begun talking about other things as well. Levin listened to their talk and, involuntarily recalling the past, the way things had been before that morning, also recalled himself as he had been yesterday before it all. It was as if 100 years had passed since then. He felt himself on some inaccessible height, from which he tried to climb down so as not to offend those with whom he was talking. He talked and never stopped thinking about his wife, about the details of her present condition, and about his son, trying to get used to the thought of his existence. The whole world of women, which had acquired a new, previously unknown significance for him after his marriage, now rose so high in his estimation that he was unable to encompass it in imagination. He listened to the conversation about yesterday's dinner at the club and thought, what's going on with her now? Is she sleeping? How is she? What is she thinking about? Is our son Dmitri crying? And in the middle of the conversation, in the middle of a phrase, he jumped up and started out of the room. "Send me word if she can be seen," said the prince. "Very well, one moment," replied Levin, and without pausing he went to her room. She was not sleeping but was talking softly with her mother, making plans for the future christening. Tidied up, her hair combed, in a fancy cap trimmed with something light blue, her arms on top of a blanket, she was lying on her back, and her eyes, meeting his, drew him to her. Her eyes, bright to begin with, brightened still more as he approached her. In her face there was the same change from earthly to unearthly that occurs in the faces of the dead, but there it is a farewell, here it was a meeting. Again an emotion like that which he had experienced at the moment of the birth welled up in his heart. She took his hand and asked whether he had slept. He was unable to respond and kept turning away, certain of his own weakness. "And I dozed off, Kostya," she said to him. "And I feel so good now." She was looking at him, but suddenly her expression changed. "Give him to me," she said, hearing the baby squealing. "Give him here, Lizaveta Petrovna, and he can look at him, too." "Well, there, let Papa have a look," said Lizaveta Petrovna, picking up and bringing to him something red, strange and wobbly. "Wait, we'll tidy ourselves up first." And Lizaveta Petrovna put this wobbly and red thing on the bed, began unwrapping and wrapping the baby, lifting and turning him with one finger and dusting him with something. Levin, gazing at this tiny, pathetic being, made vain efforts to find some trace of paternal feeling in his soul. All he felt for him was squeamishness. But when he saw him naked, and glimpsed the thin little arms, the legs, saffron-colored, with toes and even with a big toe different from the others, and when he saw Lizaveta Petrovna press down those little arms, which kept popping up like soft springs, confining them in the linen clothes, he was overcome with such pity for this being, and such fear that she might harm him, that he held back her hand. Lizaveta Petrovna laughed. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." When the baby was tidied up and turned into a stiff little doll, Lizaveta Petrovna rocked him once, as if proud of her work, and drew back so that Levin could see his son in all his beauty. Kitty, not taking her eyes away, looked sidelong in the same direction. "Give him here," she said, and even rose slightly. "No, no, Katerina Alexandrovna, you mustn't make such movements. Wait, I'll bring him. Here, we'll show Papa what a fine fellow we are." And Lizaveta Petrovna held out to Levin on one hand, the other merely propping the unsteady head with its fingers, this strange, wobbly, red being whose head was hidden behind the edge of the swaddling clothes. There was also a nose, crossed eyes and smacking lips. "A beautiful baby," said Lizaveta Petrovna. Levin sighed with dismay. This beautiful baby inspired only a feeling of squeamishness and pity in him. It was not at all the feeling he had expected. He turned away while Lizaveta Petrovna was putting him to the unaccustomed breast. Suddenly laughter made him raise his head. It was Kitty laughing. The baby had taken the breast. "Well, enough, said Lizaveta Petrovna. But Kitty would not let go of him. The baby fell asleep in her arms. "Look now," said Kitty, turning the baby towards him so that he could see him. The old-looking face suddenly wrinkled still more, and the baby sneezed, smiling and barely keeping back tears of tenderness. Levin kissed his wife and left the darkened room. What he felt for this small being was not at all what he had expected. There was nothing happy or joyful in this feeling. On the contrary, There was a new tormenting fear. There was an awareness of a new region of vulnerability. And this awareness was so tormenting at first, the fear lest this helpless being should suffer was so strong, that because of it he scarcely noticed the strange feeling of senseless joy and even pride he had experienced when the baby sneezed. 17. Stepan Arkadyevitch's affairs were in a bad state. The money for 2/3 of the wood had already been run through, and he had taken from the merchant, after a discount of 10%, almost all the money for the final third. The merchant would not give more, especially since that winter Darya Alexandrovna, claiming a direct right to her own fortune for the first time, had refused to put her signature to the receipt of the money for the last third of the wood. His entire salary went on household expenses and the paying of small, ever-present debts. They had no money at all. This was unpleasant, awkward, and could not go on, in Stepan Arkadyevitch's opinion. The reason for it, to his mind, was that his salary was too small. The post he occupied had obviously been very good 5 years ago, but now it was no longer so. Petrov, a bank director, earned 12,000, Sventitsky, a company director, earned 17,000, Mine, founder of a bank, earned 50,000. I evidently fell asleep and they forgot me, Stepan Arkadyevitch thought to himself. And he began to keep his ears and eyes open, and by the end of winter had picked out a very good post and mounted an attack on it, first from Moscow, through aunts, uncles, friends, and then, in the spring, as the affair ripened, he himself went to Petersburg. This was one of those cushy bribery posts, with salaries ranging from 1,000 to 50,000 a year, which had now become more numerous than before. It was a post as member of the Commission of the United Agency for Mutual Credit Balance of the Southern Railway Lines and Banking Institutions. 19. This post, like all such posts, called for such vast knowledge and energy as could hardly be united in one person. And since the person in whom all these qualities could be united did not exist, it would be better in any case if the post were occupied by an honest man rather than a dishonest one. And Stepan Arkadyevitch was not only an honest man, without emphasis, but was also an honest man, with emphasis, with that special significance which the word has in Moscow, when they say, an honest politician, an honest writer, an honest journal, an honest institution, an honest tendency, which signifies not only that the man or institution is not dishonest, but that they are capable on occasion of sticking a pin into the government. Stepan Arkadyevitch belonged to those circles in Moscow in which this word had been introduced, was considered an honest man in them, and therefore had more rights to this post than others did. The post brought from 7 to 10,000 a year, and Oblonsky could occupy it without leaving his government post. It depended on 2 ministers, 1 lady and 2 Jews, and, though they had been primed already, Stepan Arkadyevitch still had to see them all in Petersburg. Besides that, Stepan Arkadyevitch had promised his sister Anna to get a decisive answer from Karenina about the divorce. And so, having begged 50 rubles from Dolly, he went to Petersburg. Sitting in Karenin's study and listening to his proposal on the causes of the bad state of Russian finances, Stepan Arkadyevitch only waited for the moment when he would finish, so that he could speak about his own affairs and about Anna. "Yes, that's very true," he said, when Alexey Alexandrovitch, taking off his pince-nez, without which he was now unable to read, looked questioningly at his former brother-in-law. "It's very true in detail, but all the same the principle of our time is freedom." "Yes, but I put forward another principle that embraces the principle of freedom," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, emphasizing the word embraces and putting his pince-nez on again in order to reread to his listener the passage where that very thing was stated. And, looking through the beautifully written, huge-margined manuscript, Alexey Alexandrovitch reread the persuasive passage. "I oppose systems of protection, not for the sake of the profit of private persons, but for the common good, for lower and upper classes equally," he said, looking at Oblonsky over his pince-nez. "But they cannot understand it, they are concerned only with personal interest and have a passion for phrases." Stepan Arkadyevitch knew that when Karenin started talking about what they did and thought, the same ones who did not want to accept his proposals and were the cause of all the evil in Russia, it meant that he was near the end, and therefore he now willingly renounced the principle of freedom and fully agreed with him. Alexey Alexandrovitch fell silent, thoughtfully leafing through his manuscript. "Ah, by the way," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, I wanted to ask you, when you happened to see Pomorski, to mention to him that I would like very much to get that vacant post as member of the Commission of the United Agency for Mutual Credit Balance of the Southern Railway Lines." Stepan Arkadyevich had become accustomed to the title of this post so near his heart and pronounced it quickly, without making a mistake. Alexey Alexandrovich inquired into the activity of this new commission and fell to thinking. He was trying to make out whether there was anything in the activity of this commission that was contrary to his proposals. But since the activity of this new institution was extremely complex, and his proposals embraced an extremely vast area, he could not make it all out at once and, taking off his pince-nez, said, "Doubtless I can speak to him." "But why in fact do you want to get that post?" "The salary's good, as much as 9,000, and my means." 9,000, Alexey Alexandrovich repeated and frowned. The high figure of the salary reminded him that this aspect of Stepan Arkadyevich's intended activity was contrary to the main sense of his proposals, which always tended towards economy. "I find, and I've written a memorandum about it, that in our time these huge salaries are signs of the false economic osciillation of our administration." "But what do you want?" said Stepan Arkadyevich. "Well, suppose a bank director gets 10,000, but he deserves it. Or an engineer gets 20,000. It's a living matter, like it or not. I think that the salary is payment for value received, and it should be subject to the law of supply and demand. And if the appointed salary departs from that law, as when I see two engineers graduate from an institute, both equally capable and knowledgeable, and one gets 40,000 and the other contents himself with 2, or when lawyers or policy hussars who have no special professional knowledge are made directors of banking companies, I conclude that salaries are appointed not by the law of supply and demand but directly by personal influence. And there is an abuse here, important in itself and with an adverse effect on government functions. I believe." Stepan Arkadyevich hastened to interrupt his brother-in-law. "Yes, but you must agree that a new, unquestionably useful institution is being opened. Like it or not, it's a living matter. They especially value things being done honestly," Stepan Arkadyevich said with emphasis. But the Moscow meaning of honesty was incomprehensible to Alexey Alexandrovich. "Honesty is merely a negative quality," he said. "But you'll do me a great favor in any case," Stepan Arkadyevich said, "if you mention it to Pomorski." "Just in passing, though it depends more on Bulgarinov, I think," said Alexey Alexandrovich. Bulgarinov, for his part, is in complete agreement, Stepan Arkadyevich said, blushing. Stepan Arkadyevich blushed at the mention of Bulgarinov because he had called on the Jew Bulgarinov that same morning, and the visit had left him with an unpleasant memory. Stepan Arkadyevich was firmly convinced that the business he wanted to serve was new, alive and honest, but that morning, when Bulgarinov, obviously on purpose, had made him wait for 2 hours with the other petitioners in the ante-room, he had suddenly felt awkward. Whether it was that he, Prince Oblonsky, a descendant of Rurik, 20, had waited for 2 hours in a Jew's ante-room, or that for the first time in his life he was not following the example of his ancestors by serving the state but was setting out on a new path, in any case he had felt very awkward. During those 2 hours of waiting at Bulgarinov's, Stepan Arkadyevich had pertly strutted about the ante-room, smoothing his side whiskers, striking up conversations with the other petitioners, and devising a pun he intended to tell about how he had had much ado with a Jew, at pains all the while to conceal his feelings from everyone else and even from himself. But all the time he had felt vexed and awkward without knowing why, whether because nothing came of the pun, "I had much ado with a Jew," or for some other reason. When Bulgarinov had finally received him with the utmost courtesy, obviously triumphant at his humiliation, and all but refused him, Stepan Arkadyevich had hastened to forget it as soon as he could. And remembering it only now, he blushed. 18. "Now there's another matter, and you know which one." "About Anna," said Stepan Arkadyevich, after pausing briefly to shake off the unpleasant impression. The moment Oblonsky pronounced Anna's name, Alexey Alexandrovich's face changed completely. Instead of the former animation, it expressed fatigue and deadness. "What in fact do you want from me, sir?" he said, turning in his chair and snapping shut his pince-nez. "A decision, some sort of decision, Alexey Alexandrovich." "I am addressing you now," Stepan Arkadyevich was going to say, not as an offended husband but, for fear of thereby ruining everything, He replaced the phrase, not as a statesman, which came out inappropriately, but simply as a man. A good man and a Christian. You must take pity on her, he said. But for what, in fact? Karenin said softly. Yes, take pity on her. If you had seen her as I have, I've spent the whole winter with her, you would take pity on her. Her situation is awful, simply awful. It seems to me, Alexey Alexandrovich replied in a higher, almost shrieking voice, that Anna Arkadyevna has everything she herself wanted. Ah, Alexey Alexandrovich, for God's sake, let's not have any recriminations. What's past is past, and you know what she wishes and is waiting for, a divorce. But I took it that Anna Arkadyevna renounced divorce in case I demanded a pledge that our son be left with me. I replied in that sense and thought the matter was ended. And I consider that it is ended, Alexey Alexandrovich shrieked. For God's sake, don't get angry, said Stepan Arkadyevich, touching his brother-in-law's knee. The matter is not ended. If you will allow me to recapitulate, the matter stood like this. When you parted, you were great. You could not have been more magnanimous. You granted her everything, freedom, and even a divorce. She appreciated that. Don't think she didn't. She precisely appreciated it. So much so that in those first moments, feeling herself guilty before you, she did not and could not think it all over. She renounced everything. But reality and time have shown her that her situation is tormenting and impossible. Anna Arkadyevna's life cannot interest me, Alexey Alexandrovich interrupted, raising his eyebrows. Allow me not to believe that, Stepan Arkadyevich objected softly. Her situation is tormenting to her and that without the slightest profit to anyone. She has deserved it, you will say. She knows that and asks nothing of you. She says directly that she dares not ask anything. But I, and all the family, all those who love her, beseech you. Why must she suffer? Who is the better for it? Excuse me, sir, but you seem to be putting me in the position of the accused, said Alexey Alexandrovich. No, no, not at all. Do understand me, said Stepan Arkadyevich, touching his hand, as if he were sure that this touching would soften his brother-in-law. I'm saying only one thing. Her situation is tormenting, and you can relieve it, and you won't lose anything. I'll arrange it all for you so that you won't even notice. You did promise. The promise was given earlier, and I thought that the question of our son had settled the matter. Besides, I hoped that Anna Arkadyevna would be magnanimous enough. Pale, his lips trembling, Alexey Alexandrovich barely got the words out. She leaves it all to your magnanimity. She begs, she beseeches you for one thing, to bring her out of the impossible situation in which she finds herself. She no longer asks to have the boy. Alexey Alexandrovich, you are a kind man. Put yourself in her situation for a moment. The question of divorce in her situation is for her a question of life and death. If you hadn't given your promise earlier, she would have reconciled herself to her situation. She would be living in the country. But you promised. She wrote to you and moved to Moscow. And now for 6 months she's been living in Moscow, where every meeting is like a stab in the heart, waiting each day for the decision to come. It's like keeping a man condemned to death for months with a noose around his neck, promising him maybe death, maybe mercy. Take pity on her, and then I undertake to arrange everything so that vos scrupules, your scruples. I'm not speaking of that, not of that. Alexey Alexandrovich interrupted squeamishly. But I may have promised what I had no right to promise. So you refuse what you promised? I have never refused to do what was possible, but I would like to have time to consider how far what was promised is possible. No, Alexey Alexandrovich, Oblonsky said, jumping up. I won't believe it. She's as unhappy as a woman can be, and you can't deny her such a how far what was promised is possible. Vous professez d'être un libre penseur. But I, as a believer, cannot act contrary to the Christian law in such an important matter. But in Christian societies, and even in ours as far as I know, divorce is permitted, said Stepan Arkadyevich. Divorce is also permitted by our church. And we see, permitted, but not in this sense. Alexey Alexandrovich, I don't recognize you, Oblonsky said, after a silence. Wasn't it you, and didn't we all appreciate it, who forgave everything and, moved precisely by Christian feeling, were ready to sacrifice everything? You yourself talked about giving a kaftan when your shirt was taken, and now, I beg you, sir, Alexey Alexandrovich said, pale and with a trembling jaw, in a squeaky voice, suddenly getting to his feet. "I beg you to stop this conversation." "Oh, no." "Well, forgive me if I've upset you," Stepan Arkadyevich said, smiling abashedly and holding out his hand, "but in any case, as an ambassador, I have merely conveyed my message." Alexey Alexandrovich gave him his hand, reflected a little, and said, "I must think it over and look for guidance. I'll give you a decisive answer the day after tomorrow," he added, having thought of something. "You profess to be a free thinker." 19. Stepan Arkadyevich was about to leave when Kornei came in and announced, "Sergei Alexeyevich." "Who is Sergei Alexeyevich?" Stepan Arkadyevich was about to ask, but remembered at once. "Ah, Seryosha," he said. "Sergei Alexeyevich, I thought it was the director of some department." And he remembered, Anna did ask me to see him. He recalled the timorous, pitiful expression with which Anna had said, as she let him go, "Anyway, try to see him. Find out in detail where he is and who is with him. And, Steva, if it's possible." Could it be possible? Stepan Arkadyevich understood what this "if it's possible" meant. If it was possible to arrange the divorce so that the son would go to her. Now Stepan Arkadyevich could see that there was no question of that, but anyway he was glad to see his nephew. Alexey Alexandrovich reminded his brother-in-law that the boy never heard any mention of his mother and asked him not to say even one word about her. He was very ill after that meeting with his mother, which had not been anticipated, said Alexey Alexandrovich. "We even feared for his life, but sensible treatment and sea bathing in the summer restored him to health, and now, on the doctor's advice, I have sent him to school." Indeed, the influence of his comrades has had a beneficial effect on him, and he is now completely well and a good student. What a fine fellow he's become. Indeed, no Seryosha, but a full Sergei Alexeyevich, Stepan Arkadyevich said with a smile, looking at the handsome, broadly built boy in a dark blue jacket and long trousers who briskly and casually strode into the room. The boy had a healthy and cheerful look. He bowed to his uncle as to a stranger, but, recognizing him, blushed and quickly turned away from him, as if offended or angered by something. The boy went up to his father and handed him a report of the marks he had received at school. "Well, that's decent enough," said his father. "You may go." "He's grown thinner and taller and stopped looking like a child. He's become a real boy." "I like that," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "Do you remember me?" The boy glanced quickly at his father. "Yes, mon oncle," he said, looking at his uncle and then looking down again. His uncle called the boy to him and took him by the hand. "Well, so, how are things?" he said, wishing to start talking and not knowing what to say. The boy blushed and did not answer, but kept pulling his hand cautiously from his uncle's. As soon as Stepan Arkadyevich let go of his hand, the boy, like a released bird, shot a questioning glance at his father and with quick steps walked out of the room. It was a year since Seryosha had last seen his mother. Since then he had never heard of her again. That same year he was sent to school and came to know and love his comrades. Those dreams and memories of his mother which, after meeting her, had made him ill, no longer interested him. When they came, he tried to drive them away, considering them shameful and fit only for girls, not for a boy and a comrade. He knew that there had been a quarrel between his father and mother that had separated them, knew that he was to stay with his father, and tried to get used to the thought. Seeing his uncle, who looked like his mother, was unpleasant for him because it called up in him those very memories that he considered shameful. It was the more unpleasant since, from the few words he had heard while waiting by the door of the study, and especially from the expression on his father's and uncle's faces, he guessed that they must have been talking about his mother. And so as not to judge his father, with whom he lived and on whom he depended, and, above all, not to give in to his sentiments, which he considered so humiliating, Seryosha tried not to look at this uncle who had come to disrupt his tranquility and not to think about what he reminded him of. But when Stepan Arkadyevich, who followed him out, saw him on the stairs, called him back, and asked him how he spent the time between classes at school, Seryosha, away from his father's presence, got to talking with him. "We've got a railway going now," he said, in answer to the question. "It's like this, Two of us sit on a bench. They're the passengers. And one stands up on the same bench. And everybody else gets in harness. You can do it with hands or with belts. And they start moving through all the rooms. The doors are opened ahead of them. And it's very hard to be the conductor. That's the one who's standing up? Stepan Arkadyevich asked, smiling. Yes. He's got to be brave and agile, especially if they stop all of a sudden or somebody falls down. Yes, that's no joke, said Stepan Arkadyevich, sadly studying those animated eyes, his mother's, no longer those of a child, no longer wholly innocent. And though he had promised Alexey Alexandrovich not to speak of Anna, he could not help himself. Do you remember your mother? He asked suddenly. No, I don't, Seryosha said quickly and, turning bright red, looked down. And the uncle could get nowhere with him anymore. The Slav tutor found his charge on the stairway half an hour later and for a long time could not tell whether he was angry or crying. You must have fallen and hurt yourself, said the tutor. I told you it's a dangerous game. The director must be informed. Even if I did hurt myself, nobody would have noticed. That's for certain. What's wrong, then? Let me be. Remember. Don't remember. What business is it of his? Why should I remember? Leave me alone, he said, not to the tutor now, but to the whole world. 20. Stepan Arkadyevich, as always, did not idle away his time in Petersburg. In Petersburg, besides the business of his sister's divorce and the post, he had, as always, to refresh himself, as he put it, after the stuffiness of Moscow. Moscow, in spite of its cafes, chantants and omnibuses, was, after all, a stagnant swamp. That Stepan Arkadyevich had always felt. Living in Moscow, especially around his family, he felt he was losing his spirits. When he lived in Moscow for a long time without leaving, he reached the point of worrying about his wife's bad moods and reproaches, his children's health and education, the petty concerns of his service. He even worried about having debts. But he needed only to go and stay for a while in Petersburg, in the circle to which he belonged, where people lived, precisely lived, and did not vegetate as in Moscow, and immediately all these thoughts vanished and melted away like wax before the face of fire. 21. Wife. Only that day he had been talking with Prince Chechensky. Prince Chechensky had a wife and family, grown-up boys serving as pages, and there was another illegitimate family, in which there were also children. Though the first family was good as well, Prince Chechensky felt happier in the second family. And he had brought his eldest son into the second family, and kept telling Stepan Arkadyevich that he found it useful for the boy's development. What would they have said to that in Moscow? Children? In Petersburg, children did not hinder their father's life. Children were brought up in institutions, and there existed nothing like that wild idea spreading about Moscow, as with Lvov, for instance, that children should get all the luxuries of life and parents nothing but toil and care. Here they understood that a man is obliged to live for himself, as an educated person ought to live. Service? Here the service was also not that persistent, unrewarded drudgery that it was in Moscow. Here there was interest in it. An encounter, a favor, an apt word, an ability to act out various jokes, and a man's career was suddenly made, as with Bryant's, whom Stepan Arkadyevich had met yesterday and who was now a leading dignitary. Such service had some interest in it. But the Petersburg view of money matters had an especially soothing effect on Stepan Arkadyevich. Bartninsky, who had run through at least 50,000, judging by his train, had spoken a remarkable word to him about it yesterday. In a conversation before dinner, Stepan Arkadyevich had said to Bartninsky, "It seems to me that you're close to Merdvinsky. You might do me a favor and kindly put in a word for me. There's a post I'd like to get. Member of the agency. Well, I won't remember it anyway. Only who wants to get into all these railway affairs with the Jews? As you wish. But all the same it's vile." Stepan Arkadyevich did not tell him that it was a living matter. Bartninsky would not have understood it. "I need money. I have nothing to live on." Style of life. "You do live, though." "I live, but in debt." "Really? How deep?" Bartninsky said with sympathy. "Very deep. About 20,000. Bartninsky burst into merry laughter. "Oh, lucky man," he said. "I owe $1.5 million and have nothing, and, as you see, I can still live." And Stepan Arkadyevich could see that it was true not only in words but in reality. Zivkov had debts of 300,000 and not a kopeck to his name, and yet he lived, and how? The requiem had long been sung for Count Krivtsov, yet he kept 2 women. Petrovsky ran through 5 million and lived the same as ever, and was even a financial director and received a salary of 20,000. But, besides that, Petersburg had a physically pleasant effect on Stepan Arkadyevich. It made him younger. In Moscow he sometimes looked at his gray hair, fell asleep after dinner, stretched, climbed the stairs slowly, breathing heavily, became bored in the company of young women, did not dance at balls. In Petersburg he always felt he had shaken off 10 years. He experienced in Petersburg the same thing that he had been told only yesterday by the 60-year-old Prince Pyotr Oblonsky, just returned from abroad. "Here we don't know how to live," Pyotr Oblonsky had said. "Would you believe, I spent the summer in Baden. Well, really, I felt myself quite a young man. I'd see a young woman, and thoughts, you dine, drink a little, strength, vigor. I came to Russia, had to see my wife, and also the estate. Well, you wouldn't believe it. 2 weeks later I got into my dressing gown, stopped changing for dinner. No more thinking about young lovelies. Turned into a real old man. Only thing left was saving my soul. Went to Paris, rallied again." Stepan Arkadyevich felt exactly the same difference as Pyotr Oblonsky. In Moscow he went so much to see that, in fact, if he lived there long enough, he would, for all he knew, reach the point of saving his soul. In Petersburg he felt himself a decent human being again. Between Princess Betsy Tverskoy and Stepan Arkadyevich there existed long-standing and quite strange relations. Stepan Arkadyevich had always jokingly paid court to her and told her, also jokingly, the most indecent things, knowing that that was what she liked most. The day after his talk with Karenin, Stepan Arkadyevich, calling on her, felt so young that he inadvertently went too far in this jocular courtship and bantering, and did not know how to get out of it, for, unfortunately, he not only did not like her but found her repulsive. They fell into the stone because she liked him very much. So that he was very glad of the arrival of Princess Myagki, which put a timely end to their tete-a-tete. "Ah, you're here, too," she said when she saw him. "Well, how is your poor sister? Don't look at me like that," she added. "Though everybody's fallen upon her, when they're all 1,000 times worse than she is, I find that she acted very beautifully. I can't forgive Vronsky for not letting me know when she was in Petersburg. I'd have called on her and gone everywhere with her. Please send her my love." "Well, tell me about her." "Yes, her situation is difficult. Stepan Arkadyevich began, in the simplicity of his soul, taking her words at face value, and Princess Myagki said, "Tell me about your sister." Princess Myagki interrupted him at once, as was her habit, and began talking herself. "She did no more than what everybody, except me, does but keeps hidden. She didn't want to deceive, and she did splendidly. And she did better still by abandoning that half-witted brother-in-law of yours. You must excuse me. Everybody kept saying he's intelligent, and I alone said he was stupid. Now that he's got himself associated with Lydia and Landau, everybody says he's half-witted, and I'd be glad to disagree with them all, but this time I can't." "But explain to me, please," said Stepan Arkadyevich, "what is the meaning of this?" "Yesterday I went to see him on my sister's business and asked for a decisive answer. He gave me no answer and said he would think, and this morning, instead of an answer, I received an invitation to come to Countess Lydia Ivanovna's this evening." "Well, so there," Princess Myagki said joyfully. "They're going to ask Landau what he says." "Landau? Why? What is Landau?" "You mean you don't know Jules Landau, le fameux Jules Landau, le clairvoyant? He's half-witted, too, but your sister's fate depends on him. That's what happens when you live in the provinces. You don't know anything. You see, Landau was a commis in a shop in Paris, and he went to the doctor. In the doctor's office he fell asleep, and in sleep started giving all the patients advice. Remarkable advice, too. Then Yuri Melnidsky's wife, he's ill, you know, found out about this Landau and brought him to her husband. He's been treating her husband. Hasn't done him any good, in my opinion, because he's still as paralyzed as ever. But they believe in him and take him everywhere. And they brought him to Russia. Here everybody fell upon him and he started treating everybody. He cured Countess Bezubov, and she likes him so much that she's adopted him." "Adopted him?" "Yes, adopted him. He's no longer Landau, he's Count Bezubov. But that's not the point, it's that Lydia, I love her very much, but she's off her head, naturally fell upon this landau, and now neither she nor Alexey Alexandrovich can decide anything without him, and so your sister's fate is now in the hands of this landau, alias Count Bezubov. 22-21. After an excellent dinner and a great quantity of cognac, drunk at Bartniansky's, Stepan Arkadyevich, only a little later than the appointed time, entered Countess Lydia Ivanovna's house. "Who else is with the countess?" the Frenchman Stepan Arkadyevich asked the hall porter, looking at the familiar overcoat of Alexey Alexandrovich and a strange, naive overcoat with clasps. "Alexey Alexandrovich Karenina and Count Bezubov," the porter replied sternly. "Princess Myagki guessed right," thought Stepan Arkadyevich, going up the stairs. "Strange. However, it would be nice to get friendly with her. She has enormous influence. If she put in a word for me with Pimersky, it would be a sure thing." It was still broad daylight outside, but in Countess Lydia's small drawing room the blinds were already drawn and the lamps lit. At a round table under a lamp the Countess and Alexey Alexandrovich sat talking about something in low voices. A short, lean man with womanish hips and knock-kneed legs, very pale, handsome, with beautiful, shining eyes and long hair falling over the collar of his frock coat, stood at the other end, studying the portraits on the wall. Having greeted the hostess and Alexey Alexandrovich, Stepan Arkadyevich involuntarily looked again at the unknown man. "Monsieur Landau." The countess addressed the man with a softness and carefulness that struck Oblonsky, and she introduced them. Landau hastily turned, approached and, smiling, placed his inert, sweaty hand into the extended hand of Stepan Arkadyevich and immediately went back and began looking at the portraits. The countess and Alexey Alexandrovich exchanged meaningful looks. "I'm very glad to see you, especially today," said Countess Lydia Ivanovna, pointing Stepan Arkadyevich to the place next to Karenin. "I introduced him to you as Landau," she said in a low voice, glancing at the Frenchman and then at once at Alexey Alexandrovich, "but in fact he is Count Bezubov, as you probably know, only he doesn't like the title." "Yes, I've heard," Stepan Arkadyevich replied. "They say he cured Countess Bezubov completely. She called on me today. She's so pitiful." The countess turned to Alexey Alexandrovich. "This partying is terrible for her." "Such a blow." "And he's definitely leaving?" asked Alexey Alexandrovich. "Yes, he's leaving for Paris." "He heard a voice yesterday," said Countess Lydia Ivanovna, looking at Stepan Arkadyevich. "Ah, a voice," Oblonsky repeated, feeling that he had to be as careful as possible in this company where something special had taken place, or was about to take place, to which he did not yet have the key. A momentary silence followed, after which Countess Lydia Ivanovna, as if approaching the main subject of conversation, said to Oblonsky with a subtle smile, "I've known you for a long time and am very glad to get to know you more closely. Les Amos knows Amos, son knows Amos. But to be someone's friend, one has to penetrate the friend's state of soul, and I'm afraid you have not done so with regard to Alexey Alexandrovich." "You understand what I am talking about," she said, raising her beautiful, pensive eyes. "In part, Countess, I understand that Alexey Alexandrovich's position," Oblonsky said, not understanding very well what the matter was and therefore wishing to speak in general. "The change is not in his external position," Countess Lydia Ivanovna said sternly, at the same time following Alexey Alexandrovich with amorous eyes as he got up and went over to Landau. "His heart has changed, a new heart has been given him, and I'm afraid you haven't quite perceived the change that has taken place in him. The friends of our friends are our friends. That is, in general terms I can picture the change to myself. We've always been friends, and now," Stepan Arkadyevich said, responding to the countess's gaze with a tender gaze of his own and trying to make out which of the two ministers she was closer to, so as to know which one to ask her about. "The change that has taken place in him cannot weaken his feelings of love for his neighbors, on the contrary, the change that has taken place in him can only increase his love. But I'm afraid you don't understand me." "Would you like some tea?" she said, indicating with her eyes the servant who was offering tea on a tray. "Not entirely, Countess." "Of course, his misfortune." "Yes, a misfortune that turned into the greatest good fortune, when his heart became new, fulfilled in him," she said, gazing amorously at Stepan Arkadyevich. "I think I could ask her to put in a word with both of them," thought Stepan Arkadyevich. "Oh, of course, Countess," he said, but I think these changes are so intimate that no one, not even the closest person, likes to speak of them. On the contrary, we must speak and help one another. Yes, no doubt, but there are such differences of conviction, and besides, Oblonsky said with a soft smile, there can be no difference in matters of sacred truth. Ah, yes, of course, but... And, embarrassed, Stepan Arkadyevich became silent. He realized that they had got on to religion. I think he's about to fall asleep, Alexey Alexandrovich said in a meaningful whisper, coming up to Lydia Ivanovna. Stepan Arkadyevich turned. Landau was sitting by the window, leaning on the back and armrest of his chair, his head bowed. Noticing the eyes directed at him, he raised his head and smiled a childishly naive smile. "Don't pay any attention," said Lydia Ivanovna, and with a light movement she pushed a chair towards Alexey Alexandrovich. "I've noticed," she was beginning to say something when a footman came in with a letter. Lydia Ivanovna quickly scanned the note and, apologizing, wrote an extremely quick reply, handed it over and returned to the table. "I've noticed," she continued the conversation she had begun, "that Muscovites, the men especially, are quite indifferent to religion." "Oh, no, Countess, I believe the Muscovites have a reputation for being quite staunch," Stepan Arkadyevich replied. "But, as far as I understand, you, unfortunately, are among the indifferent," Alexey Alexandrovich said, turning to him with a wary smile. "How can one be indifferent?" said Lydia Ivanovna. "In that respect, I'm not really indifferent, but expectant," said Stepan Arkadyevich, with his most soothing smile. "I don't think the time for these questions has come for me." Alexey Alexandrovich and Lydia Ivanovna exchanged glances. "We can never know whether the time has come for us or not," Alexey Alexandrovich said sternly. "We mustn't think whether we're ready or not. Grace is not guided by human considerations. It sometimes descends not upon the laborers but upon the unprepared, as it did upon Saul." 23. "No, not just yet, it seems," said Lydia Ivanovna, who had been following the Frenchman's movements all the while. Landau got up and came over to them. "Will you allow me to listen?" he said. "Oh, yes, I didn't want to disturb you," said Lydia Ivanovna, looking at him tenderly. "Sit down with us." "One need only not close one's eyes, so as not to be deprived of light," Alexey Alexandrovich went on. "Ah, if you knew the happiness we experience, feeling his constant presence in our souls," said Lydia Ivanovna, smiling beatifically. "But sometimes a man may feel himself unable to rise to that height," said Stepan Arkadyevich, not forthrightly, acknowledging the loftiness of religion, but at the same time not daring to acknowledge his free thinking before the person who, by saying one word to Pomersky, could provide him with the desired post. "That is, you mean to say that sin prevents him?" said Lydia Ivanovna. "But that is a false view. There is no sin for believers, sin is already redeemed." "Pardon," she added, looking at the footman, who came in again with another note. She read it and responded verbally, "Say tomorrow at the Grand Duchess's." "There is no sin for a believer," she continued the conversation. "Yes, but faith without works is dead," said Stepan Arkadyevich, recalling this phrase from the Catechism, defending his independence only with his smile. "There it is, from the Epistle of the Apostle James." 24, said Alexey Alexandrovich, addressing Lydia Ivanovna somewhat reproachfully, evidently to do with something they had talked about more than once. "How much harm the wrong interpretation of that passage has done. Nothing so turns people from faith as this interpretation, 'I have no works, I cannot believe,' when that is said nowhere. What is said is the opposite. To labor for God, to save your soul by works, by fasting," Countess Lydia Ivanovna said with squeamish contempt, "these are the wild notions of our monks, whereas that is said nowhere. It is much simpler and easier," she added, looking at Oblonsky with the same encouraging smile with which, at court, she encouraged young maids of honor bewildered by their new situation. "We are saved by Christ, who suffered for us." "We are saved by faith," Alexey Alexandrovich confirmed, approving of her words with his eyes. "Vous comprenez anglais?" Lydia Ivanovna asked and, receiving an affirmative answer, stood up and began looking through the books on the shelf. "I want to read Safe and Happy, or Under the Wing." 25, she said, with a questioning look at Karenin. And, having found the book and sat down again, She opened it. It's very short. It describes the way in which faith is acquired and the happiness beyond all earthly things which then fills the soul. A believer cannot be unhappy, because he is not alone. You'll see now. She was about to read when the footman came in again. Madame Berozin, say tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Yes, she said, holding the place in the book with her finger, sighing and gazing before her with her beautiful, pensive eyes. That is the effect of true faith. Do you know Marie Sinin? Do you know about her misfortune? She lost her only child. She was in despair. Well, and what then? She found this friend, and now she thanks God for the death of her child. That is the happiness that faith gives. Ah, yes, that's very, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pleased that she was going to read and give him time to recover a little. No, he thought, looks as if it would be better not to ask for anything this time. So long as I can get out of here without messing things up. It will be boring for you, said Countess Lydia Ivanovna, turning to Landau. You don't know English. But it's short. Oh, I shall understand, Landau said with the same smile and closed his eyes. Alexey Alexandrovich and Lydia Ivanovna exchanged meaningful glances, and the reading began. Do you understand English? 22. Stepan Arkadyevitch felt completely baffled hearing this talk, which was new and strange to him. The complexity of Petersburg life generally had an exhilarating effect on him, lifting him out of his Moscow stagnation, but he liked and understood those complexities and spheres that were close and familiar to him, while in this alien milieu he was baffled, dumbfounded, and could not grasp it all. Listening to Countess Lydia Ivanovna and sensing Landau's beautiful eyes, naive or sly, he did not know which, fixed on him, Stepan Arkadyevitch began to feel some peculiar heaviness in his head. The most diverse thoughts were tangled in his head. Marie Sinin is glad her child died. Would be nice to smoke now. To be saved, one need only believe, and the monks don't know how to do it, but Countess Lydia Ivanovna does. And why is there such a heaviness in my head? From the cognac, or because it's all so strange? Anyhow, I don't think I've done anything improper yet. But, still, it's impossible to ask for her help now. I've heard they make people pray. What if they make me pray? That would be too stupid. And what's this nonsense she's reading, albeit with good enunciation? Landau is Bezubov. Why is he Bezubov? Suddenly Stepan Arkadyevitch felt his lower jaw beginning to contract irrepressibly before a yawn. He smoothed his side whiskers, concealing the yawn, and shook himself. But next he felt he was already asleep and about to snore. He woke up just as the voice of Countess Lydia Ivanovna said, "He's asleep." Stepan Arkadyevitch woke up in fear, feeling guilty and exposed. But he was reassured at once, seeing that the words "he's asleep" referred not to him but to Landau. The Frenchman had fallen asleep as had Stepan Arkadyevitch. But while Stepan Arkadyevitch's sleep, as he thought, would have offended them, however, he did not think even that, so strange everything seemed to him, Landau's sleep delighted them in the extreme, Countess Lydia Ivanovna especially. "Mon ami," said Lydia Ivanovna, carefully picking up the folds of her silk dress so as not to rustle, and in her excitement calling Karenin mon ami now instead of Alexey Alexandrovich. "Donna is la main. Vous voyez? Shh." She shushed the footman, who came in again. "Receive no one. Give him your hand." You see, the Frenchman slept, or pretended to sleep, his head resting on the back of the armchair, and made feeble movements with the sweaty hand that lay on his knee, as if attempting to catch something. Alexey Alexandrovich got up, trying to be careful but brushing against the table, went over and put his hand into the Frenchman's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch also got up and, opening his eyes wide, wishing to waken himself in case he was asleep, looked now at the one man, now at the other. It was all real. Stepan Arkadyevitch felt that his head was getting worse and worse. "Quelle la personne qui est arrivée la dernière, celle qui demandait, quelle sorte?" "Quelle sorte?" the Frenchman said, without opening his eyes. "Vous m'excuserez, mais vous voyez, revenez verster sur, encore mieux demain." "Quelle sorte?" the Frenchman impatiently repeated. "C'est moi, n'est-ce pas?" And, receiving an affirmative reply, Stepan Arkadyevitch, forgetting about what he had wanted to ask Lydia Ivanovna, and also forgetting about his sister's business, with the sole desire of quickly getting out of there, left on tiptoe and, as if it were a plague house, ran out to the street and spent a long time talking and joking with a cabby, hoping the sooner to come to his senses. At the French theater, where he arrived for the last act, and then over champagne at the Tartars, Stepan Arkadyevich caught his breath a little in an atmosphere more suitable to him, but even so he felt quite out of sorts that evening. Returning home to Pyotr Oblonsky's, where he was staying in Petersburg, Stepan Arkadyevich found a note from Betsy. She wrote that she wished very much to finish the conversation they had started and invited him to come the next day. No sooner had he read the note and winced at it than he heard downstairs the heavy footsteps of people carrying some weighty object. Stepan Arkadyevich went out to look. It was the rejuvenated Pyotr Oblonsky. He was so drunk that he was unable to climb the stairs, but he ordered them to stand him on his feet when he saw Stepan Arkadyevich. The person who came last, the one who is asking for something, must get out. Get out. You will excuse me, but you can see, come back at around 10, or better still tomorrow. That's me, isn't it? And, hanging on to him, went with him to his room. There began telling about how he had spent the evening, and fell asleep on the spot. Stepan Arkadyevich was in low spirits, which rarely happened to him, and could not fall asleep for a long time. Everything he recalled, everything, was vile, but vilest of all was the recollection, as if of something shameful, of the evening at Countess Lydia Ivanovna's. The next day he received from Alexey Alexandrovich a definitive refusal to divorce Anna and understood that this decision was based on what the Frenchman had said in his real or feigned sleep. 23. In order to undertake anything in family life, it is necessary that there be either complete discord between the spouses or loving harmony. But when the relations between spouses are uncertain and there is neither the one nor the other, nothing can be undertaken. Many families stay for years in the same old places, hateful to both spouses, only because there is neither full discord nor harmony. For both Vronsky and Anna, Moscow life in the heat and dust, when the sun no longer shone as in spring but as in summer, and all the trees on the boulevards had long been in leaf, and the leaves were already covered with dust, was unbearable. But instead of moving to Vozdvizhensku, as they had long ago decided to do, they went on living in the Moscow they both hated, because lately there had been no harmony between them. The irritation that divided them had no external cause, and all attempts to talk about it not only did not remove it but increased it. This was an inner irritation, which for her was based on the diminishing of his love, and for him on his regret at having put himself, for her sake, in a difficult situation, which she, instead of making easier, made still more difficult. Neither of them spoke of the causes of their irritation, but each considered the other in the wrong and tried to prove it at every opportunity. For her, all of him, with all his habits, thoughts, desires, with his entire mental and physical cast, amounted to one thing: love for women. And that love, which, as she felt, should have been concentrated on her alone, had diminished. Therefore, she reasoned, he must have transferred part of it to other women, or to another woman, and she was jealous. She was jealous not of any one woman, but of the diminishing of his love. Having as yet no object for her jealousy, she was looking for one. Following the slightest hint, she transferred her jealousy from one object to another. Now she was jealous of those coarse women with whom he could so easily associate himself thanks to his bachelor connections, then she was jealous of the society women he might meet, or again of some imaginary girl he wanted to marry after breaking the liaison with her. And this last jealousy tormented her most of all, especially as he himself, in a moment of candor, had imprudently told her that his mother understood him so little that she allowed herself to insist that he should marry Princess Sorokin. And, being jealous, Anna was indignant with him and sought pretexts for indignation in everything. She blamed him for everything that was difficult in her situation. The painful state of expectation, between heaven and earth, in which she lived in Moscow, Alexey Alexandrovich's slowness and indecision, her seclusion, she ascribed it all to him. If he loved her, he would understand the full difficulty of her situation and would take her out of it. The fact that she was living in Moscow and not in the country was also his fault. He could not live buried in the country, as she wanted to. Society was necessary for him, and he put her into that terrible position, the difficulty of which he did not wish to understand. And it was he again who was to blame for her being forever separated from her son. Even the rare moments of tenderness that occurred between them did not bring her peace. In his tenderness she now saw a tinge of tranquility, of assurance, which had not been there before and which irritated her. It was already dark. Alone, waiting for him to come back from a bachelor's dinner he had gone to, Anna paced up and down his study, the room where the noise of the street was heard least, and mentally went through the nuances of yesterday's quarrel in all their detail. Going further back from the memorably insulting words of the argument to what had caused them, she finally came to the beginning of their conversation. For a long time she could not believe that the quarrel had begun from such a harmless conversation, not close to either of their hearts. Yet it was really so. It had all begun with him laughing at women's high schools, which he considered unnecessary, and her defending them. He referred disrespectfully to women's education in general and said that Hannah, in his English protégé, did not need any knowledge of physics. That irritated Anna. She saw it as a contemptuous allusion to her concerns, and she devised and spoke a phrase that would pay him back for the pain he had caused her. "I don't expect you to be mindful of me or my feelings as a loving man would be, but I do expect simple tactfulness," she said. And indeed he turned red with vexation and said something unpleasant. She did not remember what reply she made to him, but only that he, obviously also wishing to cause her pain, responded by saying, "It's true I'm not interested in your concern for this girl, because I can see it's unnatural." The cruelty with which he destroyed the world she had so laboriously built up for herself in order to endure her difficult life, the unfairness with which he accused her of being false and unnatural, made her explode. "I am very sorry that only coarse and material things seem understandable and natural to you," she said, and walked out of the room. When he came to her that evening, they did not mention the quarrel that had taken place, but they both felt that, though it had been smoothed over, it was still there. Today he had not been home all day, and she felt so lonely and so pained to have quarreled with him that she wanted to forget it all, to forgive and make peace with him, wanted to accuse herself and justify him. "It's my own fault, I'm irritable, I'm senselessly jealous. I'll make peace with him, we'll leave for the country, I'll be calmer there," she said to herself. Unnatural. She suddenly remembered the most offensive thing. Not the word so much as the intention to cause her pain. I know what he wanted to say. He wanted to say that it's unnatural for me to love someone else's child when I don't love my own daughter. What does he understand about the love for children? About my love for Seryosha, whom I have sacrificed for him? But this wish to cause me pain. No, he loves another woman, it can't be anything else. And seeing that, while wishing to calm herself, she had gone round the circle she had already completed so many times and come back to her former irritation, she was horrified at herself. "Is it really impossible? Can I really not take it upon myself?" she said to herself, and began again from the beginning. "He's truthful, he's honest, he loves me. I love him, the divorce will come any day now. What more do we need? We need peace, trust, and I'll take it upon myself. Yes, now, when he comes, I'll tell him it was my fault, though it wasn't, and we'll leave." And so as not to think any more and not to yield to irritation, she rang the bell and ordered the trunks to be brought in order to pack things for the country. At 10 o'clock Vronsky arrived. 24. "So, did you have a good time?" she asked, coming out to meet him with a guilty and meek expression on her face. "As usual," he replied, understanding at a glance that she was in one of her good moods. He had become used to these changes, and was especially glad of it today, because he himself was in the best of spirits. "What's this I see?" "That's good," he said, pointing to the trunks in the hallway. "Yes, we must leave. I went for a ride, and it's so nice that I wanted to go to the country." "Nothing's keeping you." "It's my only wish." "I'll come at once and we'll talk. I only have to change." "Send for tea." And he went to his study. There was something offensive in his saying "that's good," as one speaks to a child when it stops misbehaving. Still more offensive was the contrast between her guilty and his self-assured tone, and for a moment she felt a desire to fight rising in her, but, making an effort, she suppressed it and met Vronsky just as cheerfully. When he came out to her, she told him, partly repeating words she had prepared, about her day and her plans for departure. "You know, it came to me almost like an inspiration," she said. "Why wait for the divorce here? Isn't it the same in the country? I can't wait any longer. I don't want to hope, I don't want to hear anything about the divorce. I've decided it's no longer going to influence my life. Do you agree?" "Oh, yes," he said, looking uneasily into her excited face. "And what were you all doing there? Who came?" she said after a pause. Vronsky named the guests. "The dinner was excellent, and the boat race and all that was quite nice, but in Moscow they can't do without the ridicule." Some lady appeared, the Queen of Sweden's swimming teacher, and demonstrated her art. "How?" "She swam," Anna said, frowning. "In some red costume de natation, old, ugly." "So, when do we leave?" "What a stupid fantasy." "Does she swim in some special way?" Anna said without answering. "Certainly nothing special." "That's what I'm saying, terribly stupid." "So, when do you think of leaving?" Anna shook her head as if wishing to drive some unpleasant thought away. "When?" "The sooner the better." "We won't be ready tomorrow." "The day after tomorrow." "Yes, no, wait, the day after tomorrow is Sunday. I must call on Mom Vronsky said, embarrassed, because as soon as he mentioned his mother, he felt her intent, suspicious look fixed on him. His embarrassment confirmed her suspicions. She flushed and drew away from him. Now it was no longer the Queen of Sweden's teacher that Anna pictured to herself, but Princess Sorokin, who lived on Countess Vronsky's country estate near Moscow. "Can't you go tomorrow?" she said. "No, I can't. The business I'm going for, the warrant and the money, won't have come by tomorrow," he replied. "In that case, we won't leave at all." "But why not?" "I won't go later, Monday or never." "But why?" Vronsky said as if in surprise. "It makes no sense." "For you it makes no sense, because you don't care about me at all. You don't want to understand my life. The only thing that has occupied me here is Hannah. You say it's all pretense. You did say yesterday that I don't love my daughter but pretend to love this English girl and that it's unnatural. I'd like to know what kind of life can be natural for me here. Swimming costume." For a moment she recovered herself and was horrified at having failed in her intention. But, even knowing that she was ruining herself, she could not hold back, could not keep from showing him how wrong he was, could not submit to him. "I never said that. I said that I did not sympathize with this sudden love. Since you boast of your directness, why don't you tell the truth?" "I never boast, and I never say anything that isn't true," he said softly, holding back the anger that was surging up in him. "It's a great pity if you don't respect. Respect was invented to cover the empty place where love should be. But if you don't love me, it would be better and more honest to say so." "No, this is becoming unbearable," Vronsky cried, getting up from his chair. And, stopping in front of her, he said slowly, "Why do you try my patience?" He looked as if he could have said many other things, but restrained himself. "It does have limits." "What do you mean by that?" she cried, staring with horror at the clear expression of hatred that was on his whole face, especially in his cruel, menacing eyes. "I mean," he began, but stopped. "I must ask you what you want of me." "What can I want?" "The only thing I can want is that you not abandon me, as you're thinking of doing," she said, understanding all that he had left unsaid. "But that's not what I want. That's secondary. I want love and there is none." "Which means it's all over." She went towards the door. "Wait." "Wait," said Vronsky, not smoothing the grim furrow of his brows, but stopping her by the arm. "What's the matter?" "I said we should put off our departure for 3 days and to that you said that I was lying, that I'm a dishonest man." "Yes, and I repeat that a man who reproaches me by saying he has sacrificed everything for me," she said, recalling the words of a previous quarrel, "is still worse than a dishonest man. He's a man with no heart." "No, patience has its limits," he cried, and quickly let go of her arm. "He hates me, it's clear," she thought, and silently, without looking back, she left the room with faltering steps. "He loves another woman, that's clearer still," she said to herself, going into her room. "I want love and there is none." "Which means it's all over." She repeated the word she had said, "and I must end it." "But how?" she asked herself, and sat down on a chair in front of the mirror. Thoughts of where she would go now, to the aunt who had brought her up, to Dolly, or simply abroad alone, and of what he was doing now, alone in his study, and whether this quarrel was the final one or reconciliation was still possible, and of what all her former Petersburg acquaintances would say about her now, and how Alexey Alexandrovitch would look at it, and many other thoughts of what would happen now, after the break-up, came to her mind, but she did not give herself wholeheartedly to these thoughts. In her soul there was some vague thought which alone interested her, yet she was unable to bring it to consciousness. Having remembered Alexey Alexandrovitch once again, She also remembered the time of her illness after giving birth, and the feeling that would not leave her then. Why didn't I die? She remembered the words she had said then and the feeling she had had then. And she suddenly understood what was in her soul. Yes, this was the thought which alone resolved everything. Yes, to die. The shame and disgrace of Alexei Alexandrovich and of Seryosha, and my own terrible shame, death will save it all. To die, and he will repent, pity, love and suffer for me. With a fixed smile of compassion for herself, she sat in the chair, taking off and putting on the rings on her left hand, vividly imagining from all sides his feelings after her death. Approaching steps, his steps, distracted her. As if occupied with arranging her rings, she did not even turn to him. He went up to her, took her hand and said softly, "Anna, let's go the day after tomorrow, if you like." "I agree to everything." She was silent. "What is it?" he asked. "You know yourself," she said, and at the same moment, unable to restrain herself any longer, she burst into sobs. "Leave me," she repeated between sobs. "I'll go away tomorrow. I'll do more." "What am I? A depraved woman? A stone around your neck?" "I don't want to torment you, I don't." "I'll release you." "You don't love me. You love another woman." Vronsky implored her to calm herself and assured her that there was not the shadow of a reason for her jealousy, that he had never stopped and never would stop loving her, that he loved her more than ever. "Anna, why torment yourself in me like this?" he said, kissing her hands. There was tenderness in his face now, and it seemed to her that she heard the sound of tears in his voice and felt their moisture on her hand. And instantly Anna's desperate jealousy changed to a desperate, passionate tenderness. She embraced him and covered his head and neck and hands with kisses. 25. Feeling that the reconciliation was complete, in the morning Anna briskly began preparing for departure. Though it had not been decided whether they would go on Monday or on Tuesday, since they had kept yielding to each other the night before, Anna actively prepared for departure, now completely indifferent to whether they left a day earlier or later. She was standing in her room over an open trunk, sorting things, when he, already dressed, came into her room earlier than usual. "I'm going to see Mama right now. She can send me the money through Yegorov, and tomorrow I'll be ready to leave." Good as her state of mind was, the mention of going to his mother's country house stung her. "No, I won't be ready myself," she said, and at once thought, so he could have arranged to do it the way I wanted. "No, do it the way you wanted. Go to the dining room, I'll come presently, as soon as I've sorted out the things I don't need," she said, putting something else over Annushka's arm, where a pile of clothes already hung. Vronsky was eating his beefsteak when she came out to the dining room. "You wouldn't believe how sick I am of these rooms," she said, sitting down beside him over her coffee. "There's nothing more terrible than these chambers garnis. They have no face to them, no soul. This clock, these curtains, above all this wallpaper, a nightmare. I think of Vozdvizhensku as a promised land." "You're not sending the horses yet?" "No, they'll go after us." "Are you going out somewhere?" "I wanted to go to Mrs. Wilson, to take her some dresses." "So it's tomorrow for certain?" she said in a cheerful voice, but suddenly her face changed. Furnished rooms. Vronsky's valet came to ask for a receipt for a telegram from Petersburg. There was nothing special in Vronsky's receiving a telegram, but he, as if wishing to hide something from her, said that the receipt was in the study and quickly turned to her. "I'll certainly be done with everything by tomorrow." "Who was the telegram from?" she asked, not listening to him. "Stiva," he answered reluctantly. "Why didn't you show it to me?" "What secrets can there be between Stiva and me?" Vronsky called the valet back and told him to bring the telegram. "I didn't want to show it because Stiva has a passion for sending telegrams." "Why send telegrams if nothing's been decided?" "About the divorce?" "Yes, but he writes, unable to obtain anything yet. Decisive answer promised in a day or two." "Read here." With trembling hands Anna took the telegram and read the same thing Vronsky had said. At the end there was also added, "Little hope, but we'll do everything possible and impossible." "I said yesterday that I'm totally indifferent to when I get the divorce, or even whether I get it at all," she said, flushing. "There was no need to hide it from me." And she thought, in the same way he can and does conceal his correspondence with women from me. "And Yashvin wanted to come this morning with Voitov," said Vronsky. "It seems he's won everything from Pevtsov, even more than he can pay, about 60,000. "No," she said, irritated that by this change of subject he should make it so obvious to her that she was irritated. "Why do you think this news interests me so much that you even have to conceal it?" I said I don't want to think about it, and I wish you were as little interested in it as I am. "I'm interested because I like clarity," he said. "Clarity is not in form but in love," she said, getting more and more irritated, not by his words but by the tone of calm tranquility in which he spoke. "What do you want that for?" "My God," he thought, wincing, "again about love." "You know what for you and for the children to come," he said. "There won't be any children." "That's a great pity," he said. "You need it for the children, but you don't think about me," she said, completely forgetting or not hearing that he had said "for you and for the children." The question about the possibility of having children had long been in dispute and it irritated her. She explained his wish to have children by the fact that he did not value her beauty. "Ah, I did say for you most of all," he repeated, wincing as if from pain, "because I'm sure that the greater part of your irritation comes from the uncertainty of your situation." "Yes, now he's stopped pretending and I can see all his cold hatred of me," she thought, not listening to his words, but gazing with horror at the cold and cruel judge who looked out of his eyes, taunting her. "That's not the cause," she said, "and I do not even understand how the fact that I am completely in your power can be a cause of irritation. As you put it, what is uncertain in my situation?" "On the contrary, it's a great pity you don't want to understand," he interrupted her, stubbornly wishing to express his thought. "Then uncertainty consists in the fact that it seems I'm free." "Concerning that you may be perfectly at ease," she said and, turning away, began to drink her coffee. She raised her cup, holding out her little finger, and brought it to her lips. After taking several sips, she glanced at him and, from the expression on his face, clearly understood that he was disgusted by her hand, and her gesture, and the sound her lips made. "I am perfectly indifferent to what your mother thinks and how she wants to get you married," she said, setting the cup down with a trembling hand. "But we're not talking about that." "Yes, precisely about that. And believe me, a woman with no heart, whether she's old or not, your mother or someone else's, is of no interest to me, and I do not care to know her." "Anna, I beg you not to speak disrespectfully of my mother." "A woman whose heart cannot tell her what makes for the happiness and honor of her son, is a woman with no heart." "I repeat my request, do not speak disrespectfully of my mother, whom I respect," he said, raising his voice and looking sternly at her. She did not reply. Gazing intently at him, at his face, his hands, she remembered in all its details the scene of yesterday's reconciliation and his passionate caresses. Those caresses, exactly the same as he has lavished, and will lavish, and wants to lavish on other women, she thought. "You don't love your mother." "It's all words, words, words," she said, looking at him with hatred. "In that case, we must decide, and I have decided," she said and was about to leave. But just then Yashvine came into the room. Anna greeted him and stopped. Why, when there was a storm in her soul and she felt she was standing at a turning point in her life that might have terrible consequences, why at such a moment she should have to pretend in front of a stranger, who would learn everything sooner or later anyway, she did not know. But having instantly calmed the storm within her, she sat down and began talking with the visitor. "Well, how are things?" "Did you get what was owed you?" she asked Yashvine. "Oh, things are all right. It seems I won't be getting the whole sum, and I have to leave on Wednesday." "And when are you leaving?" said Yashvine, narrowing his eyes and glancing at Vronsky, obviously guessing that a quarrel had taken place. "The day after tomorrow, I think," said Vronsky. "You've been intending to for a long time, though." "But now it's decided," said Anna, looking straight into Vronsky's eyes, with a stare meant to tell him that he should not even think of the possibility of a reconciliation. "Aren't you sorry for this poor Pevtsov?" She went on talking with Yashvine. "I've never asked myself whether I am sorry or not, Anna Arkadyevna. Just as in war you don't ask whether you're sorry or not. My whole fortune is here," he pointed to his side pocket, "and I'm a rich man now. But tonight I'll go to the club and maybe leave it a beggar. The one who sits down with me also wants to leave me without a shirt, as I do him. So we struggle, and that's where the pleasure lies." "Well, and if you were married," said Anna, "how would your wife feel?" Yashvin laughed. "That must be why I never married and never wanted to." "And Helsingfors?" said Vronsky, entering the conversation, and he glanced at the smiling Anna. Meeting his glance, Anna's face suddenly assumed a coldly stern expression, as if she were telling him, "It's not forgotten." "It says it was." "Can you have been in love?" she said to Yashvin. "Oh, Lord, more than once." "But you see, one man can sit down to cards, but be able to get up when the time comes for a rendezvous. Whereas I can be busy with love, but not be late for a game in the evening. That's how I arrange it." "No, I'm not asking about that, but about the present." She was going to say Helsingfors, but did not want to say the word Vronsky had said. Voitov came, the purchaser of the stallion. Anna got up and walked out. Before leaving the house, Vronsky came to her room. She was about to pretend to be looking for something on the table, but, ashamed of pretending, she looked straight into his face with cold eyes. "What do you want?" she asked him in French. "Gambetta's papers." "I've sold him," he replied, in a tone that said more clearly than words, "I have no time to talk, and it gets us nowhere." "I'm not guilty before her in anything," he thought. "If she wants to punish herself, tant pis pour elle." But, as he went out, he thought she said something, and his heart was suddenly shaken with compassion for her. "What, Anna?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied in the same cold and calm voice. "If it's nothing, then tant pis," he thought, growing cold again, and he turned and went out. As he was leaving, he saw her face in the mirror, pale, with trembling lips. He would have liked to stop and say something comforting to her, but his legs carried him out of the room before he could think of what to say. He spent the whole day away from home, and when he came back late in the evening, the maid told him that Anna Arkadyevna had a headache and asked him not to come to her. 26. Never before had a quarrel lasted a whole day. This was the first time. And it was not a quarrel. It was an obvious admission of a complete cooling off. How could he look at her as he had when he came into the "too bad for her" room to get the papers? Look at her, see that her heart was breaking with despair, and pass by silently with that calmly indifferent face. He had not simply cooled towards her, he hated her, because he loved another woman, that was clear. And, remembering all the cruel words he had said, Anna also invented the words he obviously had wished to say and might have said to her, and she grew more and more irritated. "I am not holding you," he might have said. "You may go wherever you like. You probably did not want to divorce your husband so that you could go back to him. Go back, then. If you need money, I will give it to you. How many rubles do you need?" All the cruelest words a coarse man could say, he said to her in her imagination, and she could not forgive him for them, as if he had actually said them to her. "And wasn't it only yesterday that he swore he loved me, he, a truthful and honest man? Haven't I despaired uselessly many times before?" she said to herself after that. All that day, except for the visit to Mrs. Wilson, which took 2 hours, Anna spent wondering whether everything was finished or there was hope of a reconciliation, and whether she ought to leave at once or see him one more time. She waited for him the whole day, and in the evening, going to her room and giving the order to tell him she had a headache, she thought, "If he comes in spite of what the maid says, it means he still loves me. If not, it means it's all over, and then I'll decide what to do." In the evening she heard the sound of his carriage stopping, his ring, his footsteps in conversation with the maid. He believed what he was told, did not want to find out any more, and went to his room. Therefore it was all over, and death presented itself to her clearly and vividly as the only way to restore the love for her in his heart, to punish him and to be victorious in the struggle that the evil spirit lodged in her heart was waging with him. Now it made no difference whether they went to Vozdvizhinsk or not, whether she got the divorce from her husband or not. None of it was necessary. The one thing necessary was to punish him. When she poured herself the usual dose of opium and thought that she had only to drink the whole bottle in order to die, it seemed so easy and simple to her that she again began to enjoy thinking how he would suffer, repent, and love her memory when it was too late. She lay in bed with her eyes open, looking at the molded cornice of the ceiling and the shadow of a screen extending over part of it in the light of one burnt-down candle. And she vividly pictured to herself what he would feel when she was no more and had become only a memory for him. "How could I have said those cruel words to her?" he would say. "How could I have left the room without saying anything? But now she's no more. She's gone from us forever. She's there." Suddenly the shadow of the screen wavered, spread over the whole cornice, over the whole ceiling. Other shadows from the other side rushed to meet it. For a moment the shadows left, but then with renewed swiftness came over again, wavered, merged, and everything became dark. Death, she thought. And she was overcome with such terror that for a long time she could not understand where she was, and her trembling hands were unable to find a match and light another candle in place of the one that had burned down and gone out. No, anything, only to live. I do love him. He does love me. It was and it will be no more, she said, feeling tears of joy at the return of life running down her cheeks. And to save herself from her fear, she hastily went to him in the study. He was in the study fast asleep. She went over to him and, lighting his face from above, looked at him for a long time. Now, when he was asleep, she loved him so much that, looking at him, she could not keep back tears of tenderness, but she knew that if he woke up he would give her a cold look, conscious of his own rightness, and that before talking to him of her love, she would have to prove to him how guilty he was before her. She went back to her room without waking him up and, after a second dose of opium, towards morning fell into a heavy, incomplete sleep, in which she never lost awareness of herself. In the morning a dreadful nightmare, which had come to her repeatedly even before her liaison with Vronsky, came to her again and woke her up. A little old muzhik with a disheveled beard was doing something, bent over some iron, muttering meaningless French words, and, as always in this nightmare, here lay its terror. She felt that this little muzhik paid no attention to her, but was doing this dreadful thing with iron over her, was doing something dreadful over her. And she awoke in a cold sweat. When she got up, she recalled the previous day as in a fog. There was a quarrel. There was what had already happened several times. I said I had a headache, and he didn't come in. Tomorrow we're leaving. I must see him and get ready for the departure, she said to herself. And, learning that he was in his study, she went to him. As she passed through the drawing room she heard a vehicle stop by the entrance, and, looking out the window, she saw a carriage with a young girl in a violet hat leaning out of it and giving orders to the footman who was ringing at the door. After negotiations in the front hall, someone came upstairs, and Vronsky's steps were heard by the drawing room. He was going downstairs with quick steps. Anna went to the window again. Now he came out on the steps without a hat and went up to the carriage. The young girl in the violet hat handed him a package. Vronsky, smiling, said something to her. The carriage drove off. He quickly ran back up the stairs. The fog that had covered everything in her soul suddenly cleared. Yesterday's feelings wrung her aching heart with a new pain. She could not understand now how she could have lowered herself so far as to spend a whole day with him in his house. She went into his study to announce her decision to him. That was Madame Sorokin and her daughter calling by to bring me money and papers from Maman. I couldn't get them yesterday. How's your head? Better? He said calmly, not wishing to see or understand the gloomy and solemn expression on her face. She stood silently in the middle of the room, gazing fixedly at him. He glanced at her, frowned momentarily, and went on reading a letter. She turned and slowly started out of the room. He could still bring her back, but she reached the door. He remained silent, and only the rustle of the turning page was heard. Incidentally, he said, when she was already in the doorway, we're definitely going tomorrow. Aren't we? You are, but I'm not, she said, turning to him. Anna, we can't live like this. You are, but I'm not, she repeated. This is becoming unbearable. You will regret that, she said and walked out. Frightened by the desperate look with which these words were spoken, he jumped up and was about to run after her, but, recollecting himself, sat down again, clenched his teeth tightly and frowned. This improper, as he found it, threat of something irritated him. I've tried everything, he thought, the only thing left is to pay no attention, and he began getting ready to go to town and again to his mother's, whose signature he needed on the warrant. She heard the sound of his steps in the study and the dining room. He stopped by the drawing room. But he did not turn to her, he only gave orders to hand the stallion over to Voitov in his absence. Then she heard the carriage being brought, the door opening, him going out again. But now he was back in the front hall, and someone was running up the stairs. It was his valet running to fetch the gloves he had forgotten. She went to the window and saw him take the gloves without looking, touch the driver's back and say something to him. Then, without looking at the windows, he assumed his usual posture in the carriage, his legs crossed, and, pulling on a glove, disappeared round the corner. 27. He's gone. It's over, Anna said to herself, standing at the window. And in response to this question the impressions of the horrible dream and of the darkness when the candle had gone out merged into one, filling her heart with cold terror. "No, it can't be," she cried out and, crossing the room, loudly rang the bell. She was now so afraid of staying alone that, without waiting for the servant to come, she went to meet him. "Find out where the Count went," she said. The servant replied that the Count had gone to the stables. "He said to tell you that the carriage will return at once, if you would like to go out." "Very well. Wait, I'll write a note." "Send Mikhail to the stables with the note." Quickly. She sat down and wrote, "DM to blame. Come home, we must talk. For God's sake come. I'm frightened." She sealed it and gave it to the servant. She was afraid to stay alone now. She left the room after the servant and went to the nursery. "No, this isn't right, it's not him. Where are his blue eyes, his sweet and timid smile?" was her first thought when she saw her plump, red-cheeked little girl with curly hair instead of Seryosha, whom, in the confusion of her thoughts, she had expected to see in the nursery. The girl, sitting at the table, was loudly and persistently banging on it with a stopper, looking senselessly at her mother with two black currants in her eyes. Having said, in reply to the governess's question, that she was quite well and was going to the country the next day, Anna sat down with the girl and began twirling the stopper of the carafe in front of her. But the child's loud, ringing laughter and the movement she made with her eyebrow reminded her so vividly of Vronsky that she hastily got up, stifling her sobs, and left. "Is it really all over?" "No, it can't be," she thought. "He'll come back. But how will he explain to me that smile, that animation after talking with her? But even if he doesn't explain, I'll still believe him. If I don't, there is only one thing left for me, and I don't want it." She looked at the clock. 12 minutes had passed. "He has received the note now and is coming back. It won't be long, another 10 minutes. But what if he doesn't come? No, that can't be. He mustn't see me with tearful eyes. I'll go and Washington. Ah, and did I do my hair or not?" she asked herself, and could not remember. She felt her head with her hand. "Yes, my hair's been done, but I certainly don't remember when." She did not even believe her hand and went to the pier glass to see whether her hair had indeed been done or not. It had been, but she could not remember when she had done it. "Who is that?" she thought, looking in the mirror at the inflamed face with strangely shining eyes fearfully looking at her. "Ah, it's me," she realized, and looking herself all over, she suddenly felt his kisses on her and, shuddering, moved her shoulders. Then she raised her hand to her lips and kissed it. "What is this? I'm losing my mind." And she went to her bedroom, where Anushka was tidying up. "Anushka," she said, stopping before the maid and looking at her, not knowing what she was going to say to her. "You wanted to go to Darya Alexandrovna's," said the maid, as if she understood. "To Darya Alexandrovna's?" "Yes, I'll go." 15 minutes there, 15 minutes back. "He's on his way, he'll be here at any moment." She took out her watch and looked at it. "But how could he go away and leave me in such a state? How can he live without making it up with me?" She went to the window and began to look out. In terms of time, he could already be back. But her calculation could be wrong, and again she started recalling when he had left and counting the minutes. As she was going to the big clock to check her watch, someone drove up. Looking out of the window, she saw his carriage. But no one came up the stairs and voices could be heard below. This was the messenger, who had come back in the carriage. She went down to him. "I didn't find the Count. He left for the Nizhny Novgorod railway." "What are you doing?" "What?" she said to the merry, red-cheeked Mikhail, who was handing her note back to her. "Ah, yes, he didn't get it," she remembered. "Take this note to Countess Vronsky's country estate. You know it? And bring an answer at once," she said to the messenger. "And I, what shall I do?" she thought. "Ah, I'm going to Dolly's, that's right, otherwise I'll go out of my mind. Ah, I can also send a telegram." And she wrote a telegram, "I absolutely must talk with you. Come at once." Having sent the telegram, she went to get dressed. Dressed and with her hat on, she again looked into the eyes of the plump, placid Anushka. Obvious compassion could be seen in those small, kind, gray eyes. "Anushka, dear, what am I to do?" Anna said, sobbing, as she sank helplessly into an armchair. "Why worry so, Anna Arkadyevna? It happens." "You go and take your mind off it," said the maid. "Yes, I'll go," said Anna, recollecting herself and getting up. "And if a telegram comes while I'm gone, send it to Daria Alexandrovna's." "No, I'll come back myself." "Yes, I mustn't think, I must do something, go out, first of all, leave this house," she said, listening with horror to the terrible turmoil in her heart, and she hurriedly went out and got into the carriage. "Where to, ma'am?" asked Fyodor, before climbing up on the box. "To Znamenka, to the Oblonsks." 28. The weather was clear. All morning there had been a fine, light drizzle, but now it had cleared up. The iron roofs, the flagstones of the pavements, the cobbles of the roadway, the wheels and leather, copper and tin of the carriages, everything glistened brightly in the May sun. It was 3 o'clock and the liveliest time in the streets. Sitting in the corner of the comfortable carriage, barely rocking on its resilient springs to the quick pace of the greys, again going over the events of the last few days, under the incessant clatter of the wheels and the quickly changing impressions of the open air, Anna saw her situation quite differently from the way it had seemed to her at home. Now the thought of death no longer seemed to her so terrible and clear, and death itself no longer appeared inevitable. Now she reproached herself for stooping to such humiliation. "I begged him to forgive me. I submitted to him. I acknowledged myself guilty. Why can't I live without him?" And, not answering the question of how she would live without him, she began reading the signboards. "Office and warehouse. Dentist. Yes, I'll tell Dolly everything. She doesn't like Vronsky. It will be shameful, painful, but I'll tell her everything. She loves me, and I'll follow her advice. I won't submit to him. I won't allow him to teach me." Filipov, baker. They say he also sells his dough in Petersburg. "Moscow water is so good. The Midishchi springs and the pancakes." And she remembered how long ago, when she was just 17 years old, she had gone with her aunt to the Trinity Monastery. 26. One still went by carriage. Was that really me with the red hands? How much of what then seemed so wonderful and unattainable has become insignificant, and what there was then is now forever unattainable. Would I have believed then that I could come to such humiliation? How proud and pleased he'll be when he gets my note. But I'll prove to him how bad that paint smells. Why are they always painting and building? Fashions and attire, she read. A man bowed to her. It was Anushka's husband. "Our parasites," she remembered Vronsky saying. "Ours? Why ours? The terrible thing is that it's impossible to tear the past out by the roots. Impossible to tear it out, but possible to hide the memory of it. And I will hide it." Here she remembered her past with Alexei Alexandrovich and how she had wiped him from her memory. "Dolly will think I'm leaving a second husband, and so I'm probably in the wrong. As if I want to be right. I can't be," she said, and wanted to cry. But she at once began thinking what those two young girls could be smiling at. Love, probably. They don't know how joyless it is, how low. A boulevard and children. 3 boys running, playing horses. Seryosha. "And I'll lose everything and not get him back." "Yes, I'll lose everything if he doesn't come back. Maybe he was late for the train and is back by now." "Again you want humiliation," she said to herself. "No, I'll go to Dolly and tell her straight out. I'm unhappy, I deserve it, I'm to blame, but even so I am unhappy. Help me. These horses, this carriage, how loathsome I am to myself in this carriage. It's all his. But I won't see them anymore." Thinking of the words she was going to say to Dolly, and deliberately chafing her own heart, Anna went up the steps. "Is anyone here?" she asked in the front hall. "Katerina Alexandrovna Levine," the footman replied. "Kitty." The same Kitty that Vronsky was in love with, thought Anna, the one he remembered with love. He regrets not having married her. And me he remembers with hatred, and he regrets having become intimate with me. When Anna arrived, the two sisters were having a consultation about nursing. Dolly came out alone to meet her guest, who had just interrupted their conversation. "You haven't left yet?" "I wanted to come and see you myself," she said. "I received a letter from Stiva today." "We also received a telegram," Anna replied, looking past her for Kitty. "He writes that he can't understand precisely what Alexei Alexandrovich wants, but that he won't leave without an answer." "I thought there was someone with you." "May I read the letter?" "Yes, it's Kitty," Dolly said, embarrassed. "She stayed in the nursery. She's been very ill." "I heard." "May I read the letter?" "I'll bring it at once." "But he doesn't refuse." "On the contrary, Stiva has hopes," said Dolly, pausing in the doorway. "I have no hope," And don't even wish it, said Anna. What is it? Thought Anna, left alone. Does Kitty consider it humiliating to meet me? Maybe she's right. But it's not for her, who was once in love with Vronsky. It's not for her to show it to me, even if it's true. I know that not a single decent woman can receive me in my position. I know that from the first moment I sacrificed everything to him. And this is the reward. Oh, how I hate him. And why did I come here? It's still worse. Still harder. She heard the voices of the sisters talking in the other room. And what shall I say to Dolly now? Shall I comfort Kitty with my unhappiness, submit to her patronizing? No, and Dolly won't understand anything either. And I have nothing to tell her. It would only be interesting to see Kitty and show her how I despise everyone and everything, and how it makes no difference to me now. Dolly came with the letter. Anna read it and silently handed it back. I knew all that, she said, and it doesn't interest me in the least. But why? On the contrary, I'm hopeful, said Dolly, looking at Anna with curiosity. She had never seen her in such a strange, irritated state. When are you leaving? She asked. Anna looked straight ahead with narrowed eyes and did not answer her. So is Kitty hiding from me? She said, looking towards the door and blushing. Oh, what nonsense. She's nursing and it's not going well, so I advised her. She's very glad. She'll come at once, Dolly said awkwardly, not knowing how to tell an untruth. And here she is. Learning that Anna was there, Kitty did not want to come out, but Dolly persuaded her to. Gathering her strength, Kitty came out and, blushing, went to her and held out her hand. I'm very glad, she said in a trembling voice. Kitty was confused by the struggle going on inside her between animosity towards this bad woman and the wish to be lenient with her. But as soon as she saw Anna's beautiful, sympathetic face, all her animosity disappeared at once. I wouldn't have been surprised if you didn't want to meet me. I've grown used to everything. You've been ill? Yes, you've changed, said Anna. Kitty felt that Anna was looking at her with animosity. She explained this animosity by the awkward position that Anna, who had once patronized her, now felt herself to be in, and she felt sorry for her. They talked about her illness, about the baby, about Steva, but obviously nothing interested Anna. I came to say goodbye to you, she said, getting up. When are you leaving? But Anna, again without answering, turned to Kitty. Yes, I'm very glad to have seen you, she said with a smile. I've heard so much about you from all sides, even from your husband. He visited me, and I liked him very much, she added, obviously with ill intent. Where is he? He went to the country, Kitty said, blushing. Be sure to give him my regards. I'll be sure to, Kitty naively repeated, looking into her eyes with compassion. Farewell then, Dolly. And having kissed Dolly and shaken Kitty's hand, Anna hastily went out. The same as always and just as attractive. Such a handsome woman, said Kitty, when she was alone with her sister. But there's something pathetic about her. Terribly pathetic. No, today there was something peculiar about her, said Dolly. When I saw her off in the front hall, I thought she was going to cry. 29. Anna got into the carriage in a still worse state than when she had left the house. To the former torment was now added the feeling of being insulted and cast out, which she clearly felt when she met Kitty. Where to, ma'am? Home? Asked Pyotr. Yes, home, she said, not even thinking of where she was going. How they looked at me as if at something frightful, incomprehensible and curious. What can he be talking about so ardently with the other one? She thought, looking at two passers-by. Is it really possible to tell someone else what one feels? I wanted to tell Dolly, and it's a good thing I didn't. How glad she would be of my unhappiness. She would hide it, but her main feeling would be joy that I've been punished for the pleasure she envied me. Kitty, she would be even more glad. How I see right through her. She knows that I was more than usually friendly to her husband, and she's jealous. And she hates me, and also despises me. In her eyes I'm an immoral woman. If I were an immoral woman, I could get her husband to fall in love with me. If I wanted to. And I did want to. This one is pleased with himself. She thought of a fat, red-cheeked gentleman who, as he drove by in the opposite direction, took her for an acquaintance and raised a shiny hat over his bald, shiny head and then realized he was mistaken. He thought he knew me. And he knows me as little as anyone else in the world knows me. I don't know myself. I know my appetites, as the French say. Those two want the dirty ice cream. That they know for certain, she thought, looking at two boys who had stopped an ice cream man, who was taking the barrel down from his head and wiping his sweaty face with the end of a towel. We all want something sweet, tasty. If not candy, then dirty ice cream. And Kitty is the same, if not Vronsky, then Levin. And she envies me, and hates me. We all hate each other. I Kitty, Kitty me. That's the truth. Twitkin, Quaffer, Jamie Fiskoy for part Witkin. I'll tell him when he comes, she thought and smiled. But at the same moment she remembered that she now had no one to tell anything funny to. And there isn't anything gay or funny. Everything is vile. The bells ring for vespers and this merchant crosses himself so neatly as if he's afraid of dropping something. Why these churches, this ringing and this lie? Only to hide the fact that we all hate each other, like these cabbies who quarrel so spitefully. Yashvin says, he wants to leave me without a shirt, and I him. That's the truth. In these thoughts, which carried her away so much that she even stopped thinking about her situation, she pulled up at the entrance of her house. Only on seeing the hall porter coming out to meet her did she remember that she had sent the note and the telegram. Is there an answer? She asked. I'll look at once, said the porter, and, glancing at the desk, he picked up the thin, square envelope of a telegram and handed it to her. I cannot come before 10. Vronsky, she read. And the messenger hasn't come back yet? No, ma'am, replied the porter. Ah, in that case I know what to do, she said, and, feeling a vague wrath surge up in her, and a need for revenge, she ran upstairs. I'll go to him myself. Before going away forever, I'll tell him everything. I've never hated anyone as I do this man, she thought. Seeing his hat on the coat rack, she shuddered with revulsion. She did not realize that his telegram was a reply to her telegram and that he had not yet received her note. She imagined him now, calmly talking with his mother and Princess Sorokin and rejoicing at her suffering. Yes, I must go quickly, she said to herself, still not knowing where to go. She wanted to get away quickly from the feelings she experienced in that terrible house. The servants, the walls, the things in the house, it all gave her a feeling of revulsion and anger and pressed her down with its weight. Yes, I must go to the railway station, and if I don't find him, I'll go there myself and expose him. Anna looked up the train schedule in the newspaper. The evening train left at 8:02. Yes, I can make it. She ordered other horses to be harnessed and began packing her traveling bag with the things necessary for several days. She knew she would not come back there anymore. Among other plans that entered her head, I have Ray hair done by Twitkin. She also vaguely decided that after whatever happened there at the station or at the Countess's estate, she would take the Nizhny Novgorod railway to the first town and stay there. Dinner was on the table. She went up to it, smelled the bread and cheese and, convinced that the smell of all food disgusted her, ordered the carriage to be brought and went out. The house already cast its shadow across the whole street, and the clear evening was still warm in the sun. Anushka, who accompanied her with her things, and Pyotr, who put them into the carriage, and the obviously disgruntled driver, they all disgusted her and irritated her with their words and movements. I don't need you, Pyotr. And what about your ticket? Well, as you like, it makes no difference to me, she said with vexation. Pyotr jumped up on the box and, arms akimbo, told the driver to go to the railway station. 30. Here it is again. Again I understand everything, Anna said to herself as soon as the carriage set off, rocking and clattering over the small cobbles, and again the impressions began changing one after another. Yes, what was that last thing I thought about so nicely? She tried to remember. Twitkin, Quaffer? No, not that. Yes, it was what Yashvin said, the struggle for existence and hatred, the only thing that connects people. No, you're going in vain. She mentally addressed a company in a coach and four who were evidently going out of town for some merriment. And the dog you're taking with you won't help you. You won't get away from yourselves. Glancing in the direction in which Pyotr had just turned, she saw a half-dead drunk factory worker with a lolling head being taken somewhere by a policeman. Sooner that one, she thought. Count Vronsky and I didn't find that pleasure either, though we expected so much from it. And now for the first time Anna turned the bright light in which she saw everything upon her relations with him, which she had avoided thinking about before. What was he looking for in me? Not love so much as the satisfaction of his vanity. She remembered his words, the expression on his face, like an obedient pointer, in the early days of their liaison. And now everything confirmed it. Yes, There was the triumph of successful vanity in him. Of course, there was love, too, but for the most part it was the pride of success. He boasted of me. Now it's past. Nothing to be proud of. Not proud but ashamed. He took all he could from me, and I'm of no use to him anymore. I'm a burden to him, and he tries not to be dishonorable towards me. He let it slip yesterday. He wants the divorce and marriage in order to burn his boats. He loves me, but how? The zest is gone, she said to herself in English. This one wants to astonish everybody and is very pleased with himself, she thought, looking at a red-cheeked sales clerk riding a rented horse. Yes, I no longer have the same savor for him. If I leave him, at the bottom of his heart he'll be glad. This was not a supposition. She saw it clearly in that piercing light which now revealed to her the meaning of life and of people's relations. My love grows ever more passionate and self-centered, and his keeps fading, and that's why we move apart, she went on thinking. And there's no help for it. For me, everything is in him alone, and I demand that he give his entire self to me more and more. While he wants more and more to get away from me. We precisely went towards each other before our liaison, and after it we irresistibly move in different directions. And it's impossible to change that. He tells me I'm senselessly jealous, and I've told myself that I'm senselessly jealous, but it's not true. I'm not jealous. I'm dissatisfied. But she opened her mouth and shifted her place in the carriage from the excitement provoked by the thought that suddenly occurred to her. If I could be anything else but a mistress who passionately loves only his caresses, but I cannot and do not want to be anything else. And by this desire I provoke his disgust, and he provokes my anger, and it cannot be otherwise. Don't I know that he would not deceive me, that he doesn't have any intentions towards Princess Sorikin, that he is not in love with Kitty, that he will not be unfaithful to me? I know all that, but it's none the easier for me. If he is kind and gentle towards me out of duty, without loving me, and I am not to have what I want, that is 1,000 times worse even than anger. It's hell. And that is what we have. He has long ceased loving me. And where love stops, hatred begins. I don't know these streets at all. Some sort of hills, and houses, and in the houses people, so many, no end of them. And they all hate each other. Well, so let me think up for myself what I want in order to be happy. Well, I get the divorce, Alexey Alexandrovich gives me Seryosha, and I marry Vronsky. Remembering Alexey Alexandrovich, she immediately pictured him with extraordinary vividness as if he were standing before her, with his meek, lifeless, extinguished eyes, the blue veins on his white hands, his intonations, the cracking of his fingers, and, remembering the feeling there had been between them, which was also called love, she shuddered with disgust. Well, I'll get the divorce and be Vronsky's wife. What, then? Will Kitty stop looking at me as she did today? No. And will Seryosha stop asking or thinking about my two husbands? And between me and Vronsky what new feeling will I think up? Is anything, not even happiness but just not torment, possible? No. Nothing, she answered herself now without the least hesitation. Impossible. Our lives are parting ways, and I have become his unhappiness and he mine, and it's impossible to remake either him or me. All efforts have been made, the screw is stripped. Ah, a beggar woman with a child. She thinks she's to be pitied. Aren't we all thrown into the world only in order to hate each other and so to torment ourselves and others? Students going by, laughing. Seryosha, she remembered. I also thought I loved him and used to be moved by my own tenderness. But I did live without him, exchanged him for another love, and didn't complain of the exchange as long as I was satisfied by that love. And with disgust she remembered what it was that she called that love. And she was glad of the clarity with which she now saw her own and everyone else's life. So it is with me, and with Pyotr, with the driver Fyodor, and that merchant, and all the people living there on the Volga, where these announcements invite one to go, and everywhere and always, she thought, as she drove up to the low building of the Nizhny Novgorod station and the attendants came running to meet her. A ticket to Obyralovka? Said Pyotr. She had completely forgotten where and why she was going, and only with great effort was able to understand the question. Yes, she said, handing him her purse and, with her small red bag on her arm, she got out of the carriage. Walking through the crowd into the first-class waiting room, she gradually recalled all the details of her situation and the decisions among which she had been hesitating. And first hope, then despair over old hurts again began to chafe the wounds of her tormented, terribly fluttering heart, sitting on a star-shaped sofa and waiting for the train, looking with revulsion at the people coming in and going out. They all disgusted her. She thought of how she would arrive at the station, write a note to him, and of what she would write, then of how he was now complaining to his mother, not understanding her suffering, about his situation, and how she would come into the room and what she would say to him. Then she thought of how life could still be happy, and how tormentingly she loved and hated him, and how terribly her heart was pounding. 31. The bell rang. Some young men went by, ugly, insolent and hurried, and at the same time conscious of the impression they produced. Pyotr also crossed the room in his livery and gaiters, with a dull, animal face, and came up to her in order to escort her to the train. The noisy men quieted down when she passed them on the platform, and one whispered something about her to another, something nasty, to be sure. She mounted the high step and sat by herself in a compartment, on a soiled, once white, spring seat. Her bag bounced on the springs and lay still. Outside the window, Pyotr, with a foolish smile, raised his gold-braided cap in a sign of farewell. An insolent conductor slammed the door and latched it. An ugly lady with a bustle, Anna mentally undressed the woman and was horrified at her hideousness, and a little girl, laughing unnaturally, ran by under the window. Katerina Andreevna has it, she has everything. Matanta, cried the girl. The little girl, even she is ugly and affected, Anna thought. So as not to see anyone, she quickly got up and sat at the opposite window in the empty carriage. A dirty, ugly muzhik in a peaked cap, his matted hair sticking out from under it, passed by the window, bending down to the wheels of the carriage. There is something familiar about that hideous muzhik, thought Anna. And recalling her dream, she stepped away to the opposite door, trembling with fear. The conductor was opening the door, letting in a husband and wife. Would you like to get out? Anna did not reply. Neither the conductor nor the people who entered noticed the expression of terror on her face under the veil. She went back to her corner and sat down. The couple sat on the opposite side, studying her dress attentively but surreptitiously. Anna found both husband and wife repulsive. The husband asked whether she would allow him to smoke, obviously not in order to smoke, but in order to strike up a conversation with her. Having received her consent, he began talking with his wife in French about things he needed to talk about still less than he needed to smoke. They said foolish things in an affected way only so that she would overhear them. Anna saw clearly how sick they were of each other and how they hated each other, and it was impossible not to hate such pathetically ugly people. The second bell rang and was followed by the moving of luggage, noise, shouting, laughter. It was so clear to Anna that no one had anything to be glad about, that this laughter irritated her painfully, and she would have liked to stop her ears so as not to hear it. Finally the third bell rang, the whistle sounded, the engine screeched, the chain jerked and the man crossed himself. It would be interesting to ask him what he means by that, thought Anna, looking at him spitefully. She was gazing out of the window past the lady at the people who, as if rolling backwards, were standing on the platform seeing the train off. Rhythmically jolting over the joints of the tracks, the carriage in which Anna sat rolled past the platform, the brick wall, the signal disc, other carriages, the well-oiled, smooth rolling wheels rang slightly over the rails, the window lit up with bright evening sunlight, and the breeze played with the curtain. Anna forgot her companions in the carriage and, to the slight rocking of the train, breathing in the fresh air, again began to think. Yes, where did I leave off? At the fact that I'm unable to think up a situation in which life would not be suffering, that we're all created in order to suffer, and that we all know it and keep thinking up ways of deceiving ourselves. But if you see the truth, what can you do? Man has been given reason in order to rid himself of that which troubles him, the lady said in French, obviously pleased with her phrase and grimacing with her tongue between her teeth. The words were like a response to Anna's thought. To rid himself of that which troubles, Anna repeated. And, glancing at the red-cheeked husband and the thin wife, she realized that the sickly wife considered herself a misunderstood woman and that her husband deceived her and supported her in this opinion of herself. It was as if Anna could see their story and all the hidden corners of their souls, turning her light on them. But there was nothing interesting there, and she went on with her thinking. Yes, troubles me very much. And reason was given us in order to rid ourselves of it. So I must rid myself of it. Why not put out the candle, If there's nothing more to look at, if it's vile to look at all. But how? Why was that conductor running along the footboard? Why are those young men in the other carriage shouting? Why do they talk? Why do they laugh? It's all untrue, all a lie, all deceit, all evil. When the train arrived at the station, Anna got off in a crowd of other passengers and, shunning them like lepers, stopped on the platform, trying to remember why she had come there and what she had intended to do. Everything that had seemed possible to her earlier was now very hard for her to grasp, especially in the noisy crowd of all these hideous people who would not leave her alone. Attendants came running up to her offering their services, young men, stomping their heels on the boards of the platform and talking loudly, looked her over. The people she met stepped aside the wrong way. Remembering that she wanted to go further if there was no answer, she stopped an attendant and asked whether there was a coachman there with a note for Count Vronsky. Count Vronsky? There was someone here from him just now. Meeting Princess Sorokin and her daughter. What is the coachman like? As she was speaking with the attendant, the coachman Mikhail, red-cheeked, cheerful, in smart blue jacket with a watch chain, obviously proud of having fulfilled his errand so well, came up to her and handed her a note. She opened it, and her heart sank even before she read it. "I'm very sorry the note did not find me. I'll be back at 10, Vronsky wrote in a careless hand. "So, I expected that," she said to herself with a spiteful smile. "Very well, you may go home," she said softly, addressing Mikhail. She spoke softly because the quick beating of her heart interfered with her breathing. "No, I won't let you torment me," she thought, addressing her threat not to him, not to herself, but to the one who made her suffer, and she walked along the platform past the station house. Two maids who were pacing the platform bent their heads back, looking at her and voicing their thoughts about her clothes. The real thing, they said, of the lace she was wearing. The young men would not leave her alone. They passed by again, peering into her face, laughing and shouting something in unnatural voices. The station master, as he passed by, asked whether she would be getting on the train. A boy selling kvass could not take his eyes off her. My God, where to go, she thought, walking further and further down the platform. At the end of it she stopped. Some ladies and children, who were laughing and talking loudly as they met a gentleman in spectacles, fell silent and looked her over as she went past them. She quickened her pace and walked away from them to the edge of the platform. A goods train was coming. The platform shook, and it seemed to her that she was on the train again. And suddenly, remembering the man who was run over the day she first met Vronsky, she realized what she must do. With a quick, light step she went down the stairs that led from the water pump to the rails and stopped close to the passing train. She looked at the bottoms of the carriages, at the bolts and chains and big cast-iron wheels of the first carriage slowly rolling by, and tried to estimate by eye the midpoint between the front and back wheels and the moment when the middle would be in front of her. "There," she said to herself, staring into the shadow of the carriage at the sand mixed with coal poured between the sleepers. "There, right in the middle, and I'll punish him and be rid of everybody and of myself." She wanted to fall under the first carriage, the midpoint of which had drawn even with her. But the red bag, which she started taking off her arm, delayed her, and it was too late. The midpoint went by. She had to wait for the next carriage. A feeling seized her, similar to what she experienced when preparing to go into the water for a swim, and she crossed herself. The habitual gesture of making the sign of the cross called up in her soul a whole series of memories from childhood and girlhood, and suddenly the darkness that covered everything for her broken life rose up before her momentarily with all its bright past joys. Yet she did not take her eyes from the wheels of the approaching second carriage, and just at the moment when the midpoint between the two wheels came even with her, she threw the red bag aside and, drawing her head down between her shoulders, fell on her hands under the carriage, and with a light movement, as if preparing to get up again at once, sank to her knees. And in that same instant she was horrified at what she was doing. Where am I? What am I doing? Why? She wanted to rise, to throw herself back, but something huge and implacable pushed at her head and dragged over her. "Lord, forgive me for everything," she said, feeling the impossibility of any struggle. A little Muzhik, muttering to himself, was working over some iron, and the candle by the light of which she had been reading that book filled with anxieties, deceptions, grief and evil, flared up brighter than ever, lit up for her all that had once been in darkness, sputtered, grew dim, and went out forever.